what the current state of the art is. Yeah? And so we'll go through that in some detail. Also, what the editors are looking for. And this is very important for you to know if you're writing your thesis or you're writing an article. And how do we know what the editor's looking for? Well, actually, they must get sick of saying the same things, right, in editors' letters to people. And they get together and they write, they write in their journal an editorial about what they're looking for in terms of survey research, and they do it for other sorts of research as well. In addition, we're going to show you some good exemplars of survey research, and then finally, where to from here. So Jessie, you got to translate.
Can I start?
Yep.
So cái slide đầu tiên của thầy là sẽ giới thiệu tất cả những 4 cái mục hôm nay mà thầy sẽ nói về. Thứ nhất là the state of the art. Như vậy the state of the art, khi mà các bạn put cái từ state of the art trên Google, trên cái định nghĩa thì bây giờ nó rất là popular. State of the art nghĩa là cái current, cái mới nhất, hoặc là cái new cái gì liên quan đến cái nghiên cứu mới nhất thì rất là popular ngày hôm nay. Liên quan đến research, thậm chí khi mà các bạn muốn viết CV hay là các giáo sư viết CV cho các bạn thì your her research is state of the art thì nó rất là popular với cái từ ngữ này. Cái thứ hai là thầy sẽ nói cho các bạn ở đây về cái editors đang tìm kiếm cái gì từ cái survey research mà sử dụng survey, right? Rồi thầy sẽ đưa cho mình một số cái ví dụ, cái câu hỏi, những cái survey nào là good hay là bad, và nó tại sao good, tại sao bad at the middle, và cái ở giữa, và cuối cùng là where to from here. Thật ra là cái này sẽ cho các bạn biết là some cái references, tức là thầy nói về cái bài này nhưng mà thầy sẽ nói cho các bạn biết là cái citation from ở đâu. Thì đó là nội dung của bài ngày hôm nay. Thank you, Tom.
Right, thank you. So we want to motivate you as to why survey research has a place in business. And we're going to take you through the rigorous and demanding nature of modern survey research, give examples of the research currently being carried out, and point out that it's already been accepted in the mainstream tier 1 journals, right? And my field, that's Journal of Financial Economics. A lot of my PhD students do mixed methods theses, right? So they would start with a systematic lit review, systematic literature review. Then they would follow that up with a qualitative study. So what's interesting about that is the systematic literature review tells you what academics think. Yeah. So some people think of them as the boffins, boffins living in ivory castles. Yeah. So not real people. So then when you go and do the second chapter is on talking to real people by doing qualitative research, and so that could be investors, financial planners, regulators. You can then see what the academics think from the lit review, then see what the real people think from the qualitative study, and then put those two together to come up with a survey, right? Which can then be the third chapter, which or the third essay, which can go to a mass. You can really do a big sample for that, and that's a really good way to think about not just doing a thesis, but approaching any research topic. Right? What's the literature say? What do real people say to the qualitative? And then putting those together to do a large-scale survey. There we go. There we go, Jessie.
Yes, okay. Cái slide này là về cái overview, tức là cái workshop này sẽ cố gắng để truyền đạt là tại sao cái survey research này đã bắt đầu được sử dụng trong business. Thì theo các bạn biết là cái business mà ở Úc thì nó thường bao gồm 2 khoa, đó là khoa Applied Finance and khoa Economics, tức là về kinh tế. Thì sẽ cũng chỉ cho các anh chị các bạn ở đây là tại sao cái survey research nó rất là rigorous, tức là rất là đòi hỏi rất là rigorous, rất là khó khăn và đòi hỏi rất là cao, demanding, right? thì thầy đưa cho một số ví dụ survey là một số cái sinh viên PhD của thầy là đang sử dụng cái mix method, tức là cái mix method đó là hỗn hợp cái cách hai ba cách khác nhau, tức là có thể bắt đầu từ literature review, sau đó thì bắt đầu mới nghiên cứu qua như là dùng cái quality tức là về quality academy quality, right? Sau đó thì đến cái chương thứ hai thì các PhD này có thể sử dụng là bởi vì là bên ngành tài chính cho nên họ sẽ dùng sẽ làm những cái là financial planner, tức là theo cái là cái bên ngành của tụi mình gọi là financial planner, tức là cái kế hoạch về tài chính rồi liên quan với policy của chính phủ, chính sách của chính phủ. Rồi sau đó thì bắt đầu kết hợp hai cái phương pháp này lại thì họ có thể làm cái cuối cùng đó là cái survey, và rất là quan trọng. Thì không có nghĩa là chỉ là survey này sẽ đi đến sẽ gửi những cái bảng câu hỏi này để hỏi về những câu liên quan đến CFO trong các công ty tài chính, là CFO hoặc là manager đó. Thì rồi thầy cũng nói là cái survey này cũng đã được chấp nhận ở một số bài báo gọi là tier 1, mà tier 1 mà thầy đưa cái ví dụ ở đây đó là thường CFO. Rồi tức là sorry, sometimes I saw some message so suddenly I translate, sorry. Tức là cái survey này được chấp nhận ở một cái số bài báo, đó là bài tier 1, tức là bài báo Q1, tức là loại 1. Thì Q1 thầy đưa ở đây là 4 star, là journal Financial Economics, mà nếu mà mọi người làm trong tài chính, ngành tài chính thì rất là mong có một bài ở đây. Yeah. Đó là cái nội dung của ngày hôm nay. Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Maybe Jesse.
Yeah.
So when I go to workshops at the uni where someone's giving a seminar, to me, some of the best seminars are when the speaker motivates their paper with information they obtain from a real world person, a market maker, a financial advisor, an investor, a fund manager, a regulator, a CFO, or other market participants. So, for me, they're the best workshops. But typically, then the seminar, the paper goes on just to do an empirical study, looking at the CompuStat tapes or the CRISP tapes or historical market data, and does typical quantitative analysis. So to me, that's great that the research was motivated by talking to real people. But to me, it's a missed opportunity, right? Because they could have done that in a more formal way, right? They could have done a formal qualitative study and then combine that with the lit review to do a formal survey, come up with questions and do a formal survey. So they're missing opportunity. And of course, we're able to do this. We're able to get motivation and do research with real people. That they're the actors that we're studying. However, scientists that are doing clinical trials to see the effect of compounds on treatment versus non-treatment groups would jump at the chance to directly talk to to see what was going on, to talk to the compounds in the atoms. Over to you, Jessie.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Như vậy khi mà thầy Tom có tham dự các seminar thì thường đó là khi mà người speaker, người nói là motivate, thường rất là hãnh diện motivate cái paper của họ với những cái thông tin mà đạt được thì thị trường như là market maker, rồi từ cái thông tin từ các fund manager, CFO và những cái CFO, giám đốc tài chính và những cái người tham gia thị trường khác. Thì theo thầy thì mình bị thiếu một cái gap ở đây, tức là ở bên tài chính tụi mình thì thường làm cái research là về empirical research, tức là làm về thực nghiệm, tức là cứ collect data trực tiếp ra sau đó chạy mô hình. Thì đó thì Jessie cũng đang làm cái chuyện đó. Nhưng mà có một cái thiếu ở đây là thầy chưa thấy cái sự kết hợp giữa quality research rồi kết hợp với background là literature review, để cuối cùng là mình combine nó lại như cái slide đầu thầy nói, để tạo ra cái survey research, đó là mình đang thiếu. Và cái ở bên dưới là thầy cũng đưa một số ví dụ về các nhà khoa học ở trong cái ngành y như là clinical trials, nghĩa là cái ngành mà mình đang làm thực nghiệm lâm sàng, thì họ sẽ thấy làm như thế nào để thấy cái ảnh hưởng của các compound, cái chất khác nhau trên cái treatments and non-treatment groups. Có là một cái cách để làm survey as well. Yeah. Mình có cần yeah, thank you. Do we need to stop somewhere for people to ask questions or not?
Yeah. They can ask questions anytime. So someone we'll have someone monitoring the chat, and they can interrupt us and say what the questions are. Yeah. So
what do you think?
We might, I might get to we're sort of just introducing it, but that soon we'll get to a point where people might want to ask questions when we get to the material problem.
I think
so this is,
we will have the co-host will monitor the chat box here in Zoom as well as in the YouTube. So maybe just get you go through for one, and then or halfway, like half an hour, 45 minutes, all right, and then we start you on the questions.
That's great. So in particular, a physicist would love to ask them atoms, molecules, and compounds what they're doing, right? But we can actually do that, right? In business, we can do that. We can ask the CFO, we can ask the investor, we can ask the regulators, right, what they're doing, and this would give us a chance to
mở liền hay là quay trở lại?
Hello.
Rất là nhiều bài liên quan đến các mô hình tài chính, đặc biệt là mô hình rất là nổi tiếng đó là mô hình KBERI. Và năm 2001 thì thầy này đã publish được một cái bài báo mà dùng survey trong tài chính, đó là bài The Theory and Practice of Corporate Finance. Thì nếu bạn nào có interest, có cái đó thì các bạn có thể tìm cái bài này để đọc.
Okay, thanks, Jessie.
Yeah, thank you.
So applying survey methods, right? We've said before, what's the state of the art? Well, it's very formal, it's very rigorous and demanding, and you need to spend the majority of your time planning. And this is the so-called 80-20 rule. Now, if you were a carpenter, building a house, there's a rule that says you measure twice and cut once. You do a lot of planning. You measure whatever you're going to do twice, and you only cut once. Well, when you're doing a survey, you should measure 4 times and only cut once, right? That's because you really don't get another chance to go out and do this mass survey, right? So you've got to make sure you've got it right. So that's what the 80-20 rule is. Spend 80% of your time getting it right first, before you actually go out and execute the survey. And it's no good just getting answers to a bunch of questions and then trying to make sense of it later. You've got to have a research question up front. So someone just can't go out, ask a bunch of questions and think, oh, that's a rich source of data. I'll be able to go back to that later and look at lots of different research questions. It's got to be purpose made, and you've got to spend 80% of your time creating that purpose made survey, planning what you're going to do before you actually go and do it. Over to you, Jessie.
Thank you. So can I make sure a little bit look like we spend 80% of planning the questions before going out to send the question to the participants? Is it correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tom. So cái slide này là mình sẽ áp dụng cái survey method, cái phương pháp survey như thế nào? Thì lần nữa thầy có nhắc lại là cái survey mà cái phương pháp nghiên cứu về và sử dụng survey thì nó rất là formal, rigorous, tức là rất là khó, đòi hỏi cao, khắc nghiệt, cái từ đó là khắc nghiệt, và rất là demanding là đòi hỏi cao. Như vậy thì where I have the something to cover the work. What is it? Can someone see that?
What's that, Jessie?
Can you
Is
tell
it from Tom?
from Tom? Yeah, please.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's alright, Tom. It's alright. So như vậy thì wait for a minute. My battery. Như vậy thì thầy có nói là chúng ta để làm cái nghiên cứu mà về sử dụng survey thì chúng ta phải spend, tức là dùng phần lớn là 80% để chuẩn bị câu hỏi, tức là phải coi lại 4 lần, đúng không? Chúng ta chia làm 4 lần, như vậy 20% một lần thứ nhất, lần thứ hai xem lại câu hỏi, lần thứ ba cũng xem lại câu hỏi, và lần thứ tư. Chứ thật ra khi mà mình làm survey mình cứ nghĩ là ok, mình có đầy đủ câu hỏi rồi thôi mình cứ kiếm người làm cho mình cái survey này survey kia, thì nó rất là sai. Đó là cái kết luận cuối cùng của cái câu thứ 3 trong cái slide này. Thì hồi đó thì các bạn cứ có một cái tâm lý là ok, cái nghiên cứu này chúng ta làm survey, sau đó chúng ta phát câu hỏi survey to participants, and khi mà nhận về thì các bạn sẽ thấy nó cực kỳ khó khăn, bởi vì có thể không đủ và mình không thể nào hỏi ask cái participant làm lần nữa. Cho nên đó là cái meaning, cái meaning, cái ý nghĩ là cái ẩn sâu trong cái công việc khó khăn của research này á, là phải plan câu hỏi cẩn thận và dành tới 80%, còn lại 20% mới khi mà chuẩn bị đầy đủ rồi thì mới send câu hỏi ra bên ngoài. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. So the types of surveys, how can you actually conduct the survey, right? So you come up with a survey or questionnaire. So it can be self-administered, where the participant themselves fill out the survey. That can be on the internet. It could be sent to them by post, or it could be delivered and collected questionnaire. Or you might actually administer the survey yourself, right? You might go and do give the survey over the telephone, or do some sort of structured interview. Interestingly enough, and we're going to see this later, these all can result in biases, right? They can all result in biases. We'll got to cover that later on. I'm very sensitive to doing surveys if it's going to help one of my students or one of my colleagues, right? But surveys take a lot of time, right? And so if I'm self-administering it, I might say it's going to take half an hour, but I want to get through it in 10 minutes if I can, right? So if I'm doing it online on the internet, and I look at the question, I'm probably going to tick off the first reasonable option that I come to. I'm not going to probably read all of the options for a
Kính thưa
question.
các anh chị,
I'm probably
trực
gonna
tiếp
go
và
to the
online thì
first
thầy
reasonable
Tom đã đến rồi ạ.
If
Và thầy
you're
đang trao đổi
asking
với
me
cả ban lãnh
yourself,
đạo của Đại học Quốc
you're
gia Hà Nội vài
administering
phút
over
trước
the
khi là
telephone,
bắt đầu chương trình ngày hôm nay.
and you're giving all
Chúng ta
the
sẽ bắt đầu vào
options.
khoảng tầm 9 giờ chính thức ạ.
I'm probably going to forget the earlier ones, right? So I'm more likely to go with the latest one, the last one you said, right? Even if I, wanted to be thorough, I'm going to be worried that you're going to get sick of me asking, oh, what was that middle one again, right? What was the second one? What was the third one again? So just the type of questionnaire, just the way you administer it, whether it's self-administered on the internet, that could lead to the participant taking an early answer, one of the early options. And if it's administered, the interviewer is reading out the question, that could lead, the bias could lead to one of the later options being selected. So that's, we're going to get into that later with biases. That's like a common method bias. Over to you, Jessie.
Thank you. So, cái vấn đề của questionnaire ở đây là chúng ta sẽ có hai cái cách, tức là mình sẽ tự quản lý, và thứ hai là mình interview qua phone. Như vậy đã Jessie mention nói về trước hai cái vấn đề nó rất là sensitive và bias. Mình tức là mình nhận câu hỏi về nó gây ra cái vấn đề bias, và cái thứ hai là nó rất là tốn nhiều thời gian. Như vậy thầy có nói cho chúng ta là ví dụ như nếu mà các bạn dùng internet để các bạn gửi cái survey á, hoặc là online á, thì khi mà tức là
các
một
bạn
cái
ơi, mình
survey có
chuẩn
thể
bị bắt đầu nha, do đó các bạn mở camera nha.
là từ
Đội ngũ giám thị
phút
bắt
cho
đầu
đến nửa tiếng.
check
Như
camera
vậy thì khi
lúc
mà
9 giờ.
hầu hết cái tâm lý mà khi nhìn cái survey online á, thì mình hay cái stick cái đầu tiên, ví dụ mình có 5 câu hỏi và ABC 1 đến 5 thì cái đầu tiên stick strongest something like that, thì chúng ta cái chọn cái đầu tiên. Và thường thì Jessie cũng là như vậy, và cũng giống như là mình giúp đồng nghiệp hay là một số sinh viên PhD gửi đến câu hỏi thì thú thật là cũng hơi là bận rộn cả, cho nên mọi người có một cái tâm lý là ok giúp thì giúp, nhưng mà cái stick cái đầu tiên thì đó là cái tâm lý chung, và cái đó là làm cho người đi collect survey rất là khó khăn. Là chọn ABCD, nhưng mà khi mà mình đưa một cái list ví dụ như 5 cái thì không sao, nhưng mà ví dụ như có một cái 20 cái option để chọn thì thường các bạn sẽ nhớ những cái option cuối cùng, the last one right?
Good morning. Hello. Good morning, esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, and all participants. On behalf of the organizing committee, it is my great privilege to welcome you today to today's workshop on mastering mixed research methodology, strategies, and application. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our honored guests who are with us today. First, we have Mr. Tom Smith, Professor of Finance at Macquarie University, Australia, who will serve as our keynote speaker. Next, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Phan Hồng Đức, founder and president of Knowledge Bridge Research Institute. And finally, we are honored to have Ms. Dr. Đào Tùng, Vice Director of International Francophone Institute under Vietnam National University. Before we move forward with the program, I would like to kindly invite our distinguished guests and all participants to come forward for a group photo to commemorate this special occasion. Let's take a moment to capture this gathering. Chụp ảnh chung ạ. Can you stand backward like this to take a group photo? Yes. Can you have?
You want me to sit it? I just bring the chair over.
Thầy ngồi thấp không được em. Thầy ngồi thấp không được. Thầy
I can sit on that chair.
Dạ, vậy em phải
Anh người ghế là vào.
You're put in the photo too.
Chắc là thầy phải ra đây rồi.
đứng thì là ngồi.
Ngồi đây ạ. Yes, that's perfect.
More time for photo, individually or group photo at the end at the graduation ceremony. Yeah, for those who register and receive certificate from professional. At the end, 5:30 to 6 o'clock. So make sure that you will be here, all of you, and then pay attention. Study or give yourself a full of yourself. Until 5:30 p.m. Yeah.
Vâng, trước khi bắt đầu chương trình thì cũng xin được trân trọng giới thiệu với toàn thể lớp và thầy Tôm là có chị Trần Thị Thanh Tú, trưởng ban khoa học công nghệ Đại học Quốc gia Hà Nội cùng tham gia vào chương trình ngày hôm nay ạ. And Mr. Tôm, Ms. Tú, the head of our science department.
Thank you, everyone. And now to officially begin the program, may I respectfully invite Dr. Phan Hồng Đức to deliver the opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here at IFI to give you Professor Tom Smith from Macquarie University at Sydney, Australia. And in the last few years, it is my honor to be accepted as Professor Tom Smith's sister, younger sister. Yes, correct, Tom? Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. All right, so it's actually not easy for Professor Tom Smith to travel far away from Australia to Vietnam. And honestly, I feel very deeply appreciated for Tom's efforts, right? So we already have a very successful event in Ho Chi Minh City. So I do hope that Hanoi can do better, right? Because this is, the second time we run this workshop, right? So before we start, I would like to say thank you to one of KBERI's sponsors. It is Mr. Nguyễn Mạnh Hoài Vũ from Curtin University. Vũ has contributed or donated $40 million to KBERI to run, for KBERI events and KBERI seminar. Right. And I also would like to acknowledge, the partnership of IFI-VNU, and in particular is the Dean, Dr. Phùng Danh Thắng, yeah. Sorry, Professors Đào Tú, right? Dr. Phùng Danh Thắng, yes, and Mr. Phan Xuân Thắng, right, to let the event happen today, right? So I would like to invite Professor Tom, anyone, yeah, to start, yeah. Oh, for the speak.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Đức, for your insightful remarks. I would like to invite Dr. Đào Tùng to be on stage and share a few words. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Professor Tom Smith. On behalf of the IFI Director Board and IFI lecturers and researchers. First, we would like to thank you for your participation today, especially Professor Tom Smith, who will be leading the workshop today. As Ms. Đức told, we will talk about the mixed research methodology today, and all of you once participate in the research field, you know this very important for you. So I'm persuaded that today Professor Tom, with his sharing, we will have extended and advanced knowledge about this methodology. Finally, on behalf of the IFI Director Board, we would like to thank you, Professor Tom. Thank you all of you for being here today for the seminar. We do hope that we will have interesting discussion. We encourage your participation to the seminar to have good knowledge about this methodology. Thank you and enjoy the workshop.
Thank you so much, Dr. Đào Tùng. And now it is great pleasure that I invite our keynote speaker, Mrs. Tom Smith, to take over the stage.
Thank you so much for the lovely welcome. This is where we're going to start. Qualitative, it's on page 44 of your book. But I just thought I would tell you a little bit about how this all hangs together. So, is this working? Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to cover systematic lit reviews. Yep. So I can hear myself on Zoom. There's a whole Zoom audience of about 100 people coming into this as well. So we probably need a better marker if someone can find, because this one is losing its juice. So systematic lit reviews will be very good for, you know, in your mixed method research, if you want to do mixed methods, for getting out the main research groups. In your area, right? So whatever the area of study is, we'll show you a method that'll tell you historically what have been the main research groups in that area. Yep. And also coming up with emerging themes. Yep. But you've got to remember that this is what the academics, when you do a literature review, it's what the academics think. Yeah. So it might be very different from what, you know, qual interviews, for example, when you go and talk to the people, the actual business people, the actual market participants, the actual people that, yeah, so you might get different insights here, yeah, and you combine the two, yeah, what the academics say, what the actual agents in the markets think, and that might lead you to coming up with good survey questions. Yeah. So that might lead you to the interaction from what's raised in the systematic lit review and what's added to that from the interviews in a qual might help you do, yeah, and you might be able to form a hypothesis, and that enables you to do a survey or an experiment. We'll swap you. Experiment. Oh, it's much better. Or a empirical study. Yeah. So this is why, you know, these are all the different research methodologies. The systematic lit review, the qualitative, the survey, the experiments, and the empirical study. But you can see if you combine any of those together, that's what's called a mixed method, yeah, doing mixed method. But it really does make sense, right? You're starting in a new field. You do a systematic literature review. It's an eagle eye look at the field. And from your systematic literature review, you identify and discuss what have been the major groups of thought in this topic. And then you look at the emerging themes. Yeah? Then you look at the emerging themes. And of course, the readers love that because that's giving them clues as to what to work on. And then, but remembering this has come from articles from academics. So you might actually want to go and talk to the real agents, yeah, in the economy, the business people, yeah, and get their views on it. And you might get some, very deep insights as to what's going on. So then you combine the results of these, try to form a hypothesis that you go out and test, either using a survey, experiment, empirical study. And of course, the loop doesn't end there. You might go back. Yeah. You might go back up and start again. Yeah. You might find something that's you hadn't anticipated, so you go back again, right? For example, you might find findings that are very unique, so you might go back and talk to people again, right? To try to get a deeper insight as to why you got that finding. Now, this is something that the physicists can't do. They can't talk to the atoms or the molecules, right? And so they think we're very foolish. If we only do empirical study, they think we're very foolish if we don't go out and talk to the objects of our study, because they talk back. They'll tell you, right? You can get some very deep insights into what's going on by talking to people, but you can't ask the atoms whether there's a Higgs boson lying underneath, right? A God particle, because they can't talk back. So you have to build hundreds of mile long super colliders and smash atoms together and risk blowing up the world to find the Higgs boson. And they did. Luckily, they didn't blow up the world. Okay, so you see what we're talking about with the mixed method. So I always talk about the people in my field, which is finance. It's very empirical, yeah. And people in my field thinks there's only one objective truth. Most people think there's only one objective truth, right? Whereas, we all probably think there's a continuum. So it's a continuum. So the people in my field are very much here thinking there's one objective truth out there waiting to be discovered, but there's a continuum. And then right at the other end is everyone sees a different reality. And in fact, there is a different reality for every person. And that's got a big name. This continuum, it's got a big name. Does anyone know what it is? Epistemology. Yeah. So how do we know what we know? So it really depends on you, right? Is there one objective truth? You might have come here thinking that, but you might go away not thinking that, right? Does everyone see a different reality? If everyone here had to write a page on what happened today, I bet there'd be many, many different versions of what happened today, right? Because you will all be seeing something different. The police, when there's been a crime, they hate when there's many witnesses. Do you know why they hate when there's many witnesses? Because of this, right? Because no two of the witnesses see the same thing, right? So each witness, actually, even though the same event, we think the same event occurred, but each witness sees something different. And do you know what happens to the police's case when it goes to court, when they've got multiple witnesses? Well, the defense attorney gets the witnesses up on the stand one by one and tears the police's case to pieces because there's inconsistencies in what the witnesses say. right? And the judge says, well, you know, I can't figure out what happened here. Everyone's telling a different story, and throws the case out of court. But if the police find just one witness to the crime, then they're very happy, because that witness gets up, they're very sure of what they saw, and the defense can't do anything about it, and the police get the successful prosecution. And that's all because, you know, people see different realities. So it's very important to get the perspective of a lot of different people. So in qualitative research, we call that triangulation. So if you're studying a big financial fraud or a big financial disaster, most people just study the investors, the people that lost their money. And yeah, rightly so. But other people, yeah, other sections of the community are important. The financial planners that got them into those investments, they might have a story to tell. They mightn't be the clear-cut bad guys. So it's good to talk to them. They might have a different version of reality. And then we're going to get some feedback. And then the regulators. So regulators often get to blame. They get the blame because this financial disaster occurred, but they might have a very different view of reality, right? That they were doing their job properly. You're supposed to let markets function and only step in when there's a problem. Yeah? And that's exactly what they did. So that is called actor triangulation. Yeah? So not just the investors, but also the financial planners, also the regulators. So in your own research, you can think about the different actors, you know, in the research you're looking at, and wouldn't it be great to get the insights from them? Because remembering this thing called epistemology, I can't quite say it, it's a big word, but you know, they may have seen different things, and they may well be very valid, yeah, views. Now, don't think this is something that the social science made up. You know, there's physicists, you know, also think that reality only exists because we observe it, right? And different observers can see different realities. Who's the guy with the cat? The guy got a cat, and we don't know whether the cat is alive. It's in a box, a vacuum seal box. Schrodinger's cat. So this is a big thing in physics, right? It depends on the cat's only alive or dead, depending on observation. It's only if you observe it, right, that the cat is alive or dead. Before observing, the cat is neither alive nor dead. So it's an issue even in physics. And it's like this thing about the one objective truth versus many different realities. Okay, so this is the idea of combining these 5 research methodologies, right? And doing a mixed method study. For someone doing a thesis, a very good approach is to do the systematic lit review. It identifies what has historically been the main research groups and also the emerging themes. You might then go directly to doing a couple of empirical studies, yeah, or an experiment and an empirical study. Or you might delve further by doing a qual study, yeah, and then a survey, right? So you think of a thesis as 3 essays. It could be systematic lit review, 2 empirical studies. Systematic lit review, experiment, empirical studies. So there are 3. Systematic lit review, qual, and then survey. Many of my students do these 3. Yeah. But if you're doing a research topic, you're the person that's famous for doing ESG research. Well, you might find you do all of these, right? You have a really good idea, but first you find out what others have done and what's emerging. Then you talk to the relevant people. Then you do a survey, and then you might say, well, then I continue on. I do experiments, empirical studies. I find things, I go back to the qual and keep going. Yeah. So this, you build your whole career around being the person, the ESG person, the person for that topic. Yeah, and you don't just have a hammer. My colleagues just have a hammer, and everything they see is a nail, right? They want to study women on boards, but they all they know is to use empirical study. So they go to the CompuStat tapes and the CRISP tapes, the financial market tapes. But, they could actually go and talk to people, right? They could talk to the women, they could talk to the companies, right? They could survey them. So they're missing opportunity. But because they only have a hammer, they can only do empirical studies, right? They can't do the subtle things, right? Like the qualitative or the survey. So, what today is about is to give you all of these tools in your belt, right? You might already have a hammer, but we're going to give you lots of other tools, right? You can't build much of a house with a hammer. You need a saw, you need a level, you need lots of other tools. So these are the different research methodologies. So each year, Professor Lynn Looker and I teach this course, exact same course you're doing in Australia. It's a national PhD course, free for everyone. Students from all over universities all over Australia and New Zealand do it. So what we've done is Duke has arranged for me to come here and to teach the course to you, and you have actually the workbook of the notes that we use. But before we start, I do want to acknowledge the university for giving us the space here. And I met some very nice people from the university and they're very welcoming. But I especially want to honor Duke, right, who founded Knowledge Bridge. And it's so important, right, trying to build research capabilities. I've dedicated my life to trying to teach people how to do research, right? I've been offering national PhD courses for over 30 years now and work very hard for my PhD students and colleagues to get tier 1 publications in their own name. So they have over 50 tier 1 publications in their own name. That is their name, not mine. So my goal is to help you to get the big publications, but in your name, not Tom Smith and you, right? That way everyone knows that it's your work. So Duke has been doing this with Knowledge Bridge. So it's a fantastic thing. And it's for all of Vietnam. So whenever Duke calls me and says, will you do something? I always say, of course, what you're doing is so important. And when she asks me, how much would you like to charge for this? I always say it's free because you're doing so much and we also support you. So I greatly admire Duke and I'm inspired by her. So I think we should give her a round of applause. Yep, ready to go?
Yeah. So, want to use the slide?
Yep.
Okay,
I can't read what's on the board, by the way.
yeah, no, that we see you use the one before.
Yeah.
So, are you doing the qualitative?
Qualitative first. Hello, everyone on Zoom. You're very welcome. How many up are we up to now?
I think 112 now.
112.
Yeah.
112 people on Zoom. I'll be competing with Donald Trump for the number of people at the rally. And just pull that across. That's bigger. Yep. No, that's good. Let's just pull it across. You can grab it and pull it across. Oh, that's even better.
Yep.
That's even better.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So you go up and down.
Yep, I got it. Okay, so one of the very first methodologies is qualitative research. I normally start with that, although I always write them down as logically when you're doing a thesis or a paper, you'd start with a lit review. But for some reason, I always start with the qualitative research because I find it very appealing. So I'm trying to motivate you as to why, qualitative research has a place in your research. And I guess, that particularly in a field like finance, right, which was so heavily empirical, right, it's a bit of a sell job to them. But, you might think that qualitative research is going to be easy, right, because you already talk to people and you're very good at talking to people, right? And that means, and quality research is just talking to people, but it's not, right? You'll see it's very rigorous and demanding. You check, you double check, you triple check. This idea of triangulation is what makes it very scientific, right? So, and replicable. And we'll do an example. We'll do some group work at the before we close for our morning tea break, and I'll show you. We'll have a bunch of different groups here and online, and you'll be looking at the teachers' responses about why they became teachers. And I'll get each group to come up with, say, their top 3, yeah, and we'll have like 20 groups, right? And I bet they all come up with pretty much the top 3, right? So what that is showing in your groups, you're doing researcher triangulation on the themes, and you're not supposed to fight or argue or anything, but polite academic conversation. Out of the 100+ responses, you'll come up with the top 3, and you'll see that process in your group is very scientific, because all the other groups will come up with pretty much the same, right? So triangulation really works. I'm going to give you some examples and encourage you to catch the wave. So essentially, we're going to go through the state of the art. What's the current thinking in this field? Yeah. What the editors are looking for, and how do we know what the editors are looking for? Well, sometimes they get so frustrated that the people keep doing the same things that aren't working for the editors and aren't working for the authors, that they write an editorial about it. So I collect all these editorials so I can tell you what the editors are looking for. And we're going to show you some great examples of the methodology, and then where to from here. So 4-pronged: state of the art, what the editor is looking for, some great examples, and where to from here. So when I go to my weekly seminar, if the seminar starts off by motivating the talk, and it's always an empirical study because I'm in finance, but if they motivate the talk by a conversation they had with a CEO or a CFO or a market maker or a financial planner, I always find they're going to be really good seminars, because it's going to be a relevant question. But it's an opportunity missed, isn't it? So rather than just having that one conversation and using a hammer to go and do an empirical study, they could have had many conversations and got lots of different viewpoints, on this from many different CEOs, CFOs, financial planners, And of course, the scientists would say, "You're crazy, you're missing an opportunity. I'd love to be able to talk to the atoms and the quarks and the Higgs boson systems." So they would love to do that, right? So they think, what are you doing, in social science? If you're not talking to the agents you're studying, you're missing great opportunities. And, my empirical friends in finance would say, well, they might lie to you. And I say to you, well, your data mightn't be correct either. But you do checks and balances, and you'll notice in checks and balances in qualitative, it's far more rigorous than the checks and balances in empirical work, and all this triangulation we're talking about. So a very famous example of qualitative research in finance is a study by Lintner in 1956, published in the top journal, the Journal of Finance. So Lintner is a very famous finance scholar. In fact, you've heard of the Sharpe-Lintner capital asset pricing model, and for which Sharpe got the Nobel Prize. Lintner didn't get it. You know why Lintner didn't get it? Well, he died. He died before the prize was awarded. And they don't give the prizes to people who have died, right? They don't give posthumous Nobel Prizes. Now, you might think that's a bit silly, but if they did that, every year there'd be one person taking out all the prizes, and it'd be a guy called Archimedes, right? Because he come up with so many great things that every year Archimedes again wins the Nobel Prize. Archimedes. So it can only be for the living people, right? So what Lintner did, or he got his RA to do, we'd prefer you to go and do your own talking to people, your own interviews. But Lintner got his friend and research assistant to go out and talk to CFOs and CEOs about, what went through their mind when they were paying dividends. How do they come up with the dividend decision. So this is nearly 70 years ago. And after talking to these people, he came up with a model, like an empirical model. And that, even after 70 years, is pretty close to what people think now. So it had research that had a profound effect. So obviously Lintner did some very important work, and then of course he went on and come up with a capital asset pricing model as well. So yeah, I just want to make the case that qualitative research is very demanding and rigorous, right? And you have to keep account of, your methodology, changes in methodology. You keep a lot of memos, right? And you make a lot of declarations. So things you started, but they didn't work, yeah, you make a note of that and you include them in your write-up. So in empirical studies in finance, people try to predict returns, right? And they typically have 5 variables, and they get an R squared of something like a goodness of fit of about somewhere less than 20%. And they go, oh, that's pretty good. I got a higher I squared than anyone else. But what they don't tell you is that the thousands of other variables they tried that didn't work and they discarded them, right? Whereas in qualitative, you'd have to do that, right? So if my friends in finance had to say, well, here are the 5 that generated the 20% R squared, but I did try and they list another 1,000 and they didn't work, then they'd all be exposed as frauds, right? Because when you have 100 or more to choose from and you pick the best 5, then the cutoff isn't, in statistics, they look at 5% level of significance. So with multiple comparisons, you take the 0.05 level of significance and you divide it by the number of comparisons you do. So you know how many comparisons there are in 100 choose 5? Over 2 million. Way over 2 million. 50 choose 5 is 2 million. So they would never, what they find is not significant when you allow for the fact that they did multiple comparisons, right? So a qualitative researcher wouldn't get away with trying lots of things and just reporting the thing that works, because they have to say, what they tried and what didn't work, right? In order for this to be replicable. So I would say that qualitative methods is more demanding and rigorous than the empirical quantitative people. So I want to talk to you about 3 ways of double, triple checking, right? So I already talked about ACTA, triangulation. You're going to do an exercise in researcher triangulation because you're going to try to go through these teachers' responses and come up with the top 3, the top 3 responses. And this is another one. This is data triangulation, right? So when you do an interview, it's a good idea to record it. Yeah, record the interview. You got to get approval beforehand, ethical consent, and get the person to agree to being recorded. But because you're recording it, that enables you, rather than taking notes, that enables you to observe, right? So someone might be telling you something, but you can tell it's not true, right? Just from their body language, right? The other thing is, as you're, about to go in and interview the CEO about women in the workforce, that CEO might tell you a great story, but you might notice as you're going in that he's being quite sexist, right? And misogynist to the female employees, right? As you walk in and walk out. So they're observations. So you're not just taking, people might lie to you, right? But the data might be wrong too. But do the empirical people doing empirical studies, do they double, triple check like you're doing? No, they do not, right? So you're not only listening to what they say, and it's there on the tape and you can transcribe it later. If you're doing it on Zoom, of course, Zoom does a transcript for you, right? Which is saving you a bunch of money in transcription. So you do the interview, you talk to the person, you observe. By taping it, that gives you the ability, you're writing things down, they probably think you're writing down what they say, but you're observing. This guy doesn't seem to be serious. You can't be serious. You don't believe what you're saying. Or this person passionately believes what they're saying. You can tell by their enthusiasm for the subject, right? So it's not all bad. So the other thing is the CFO might be telling you one thing, but the documents about promotion and pay might be completely different. So that's the third element of data triangulation. Yeah. So not just the interviews, but also the observations and also the documents. And the documents might be something that the company has, but there might also be inquiries, right? Just recently, we had a Royal Commission on our banking industry where the government did a full judicial review. Apparently, our banks were charging interest to people who had died and all sorts of, and charging excess fees, all sorts of things. So there was hundreds and hundreds of submissions to the Banking Royal Commission from investors, from financial planners, etc. So that became a great great source of data, all these site documents that could be looked at and investigating, whatever you're looking at. So that's data triangulation, yeah, and you can see how you're double, triple checking. Researcher triangulation is where, for example, you try to come up with the questions. You've got your research question, but the questions you're going to ask. So you might triangulate with another researcher. Doesn't have to be three, even though we're saying triangle. You triangulate with another researcher about what questions would elicit the responses, desired for this research question. In coming up with themes, you go through all the interviews and you might end up with 30 or 40 initial themes, right? But the editor wants to see the process that went through, right? The author's mind. They want to see how you iterated from the 30 or 40 themes to intermediate themes. And there might be, 10 to 15 intermediate themes. And then you iterate on that to the final themes. And there might be like 3 to 5 final themes. But you would do that by iterating with the other researcher. Yeah. So that means it makes it systematic and replicable. Others looking at the same initial themes would come up with the same intermediate themes and final themes. Yeah? And we'll have an example of researcher triangulation by looking at all the initial, responses by the teachers. There's over 100, and I bet each group comes up with essentially the top 3 final themes, right? But you'll iterate between initial themes, intermediate themes, and final themes. And then finally, there's a lot of double, triple checking going on here in qual, isn't it? It's very rigorous, not just talking to people. So finally is the participant triangulation. So you don't just talk to the investor, you talk to the financial planner and you talk to the regulator. So all 3, and they might have completely different views of the world. And in fact, the world might be different, right, for each of them, right? So not to say they just have a view of the world actually might be different for them, right? Your view of the world is the way the world is, of course, right? You don't essentially know what my view of the world is, but my view of the world is the way the world is. So they could be quite completely different. So these are the forms of double, triple checking that make qualitative research, modern qualitative research, so demanding, and so rigorous, right? So it's a lot harder to do a qualitative study than to run some data and report a T and F test, yeah? So it's a lot harder, right? A lot more double, triple checking. Although I will tell you later on, and you'll be pleased to know that it's getting harder and harder for the empirical studies. So I'll show you what they keep raising the bar. And for empirical studies, they keep raising the bar. And the big thing now is establishing causation. Everyone knows that, there is a problem. Storks arriving, babies born. Association doesn't mean causation. So the editors, every time you do an empirical study now, wants to talk about causation, something called endogeneity. So they want you to do something that shows causation, right? And I'll tell you what the state of the art is. But even when you nail that down, they want certain assumptions that need to be there to be satisfied, and I'll tell you about that later on. But then they want more, not only that you've shown causation, but then they want you to fit a structural, do a structural estimation, fit a theoretical model, so you can ask the what if questions. So it keeps getting, the bar keeps getting higher and higher for the empirical people. So we also talked about memos. You've got to keep account of the variables you tried in predicting returns but didn't work. So you've got to write down the 1,000 that failed. That's if you're an empirical study. But for a qualitative researcher, you may have designed how you're going to do the interviews one way, but you find it's not working, right? The people sort of stare at you blankly when you ask some of the questions. So you say, okay, this isn't working. I tried this and it isn't working. So I've changed the question to be this, and you go on. Yeah. Reflections, you might go, okay, I'm only 5 interviews in, but now I can see a major reason that teachers want to be teachers is that they really want to bring on the next generation. So you might have a flash of insight. So you write that down in your reflections. I know there's 100. I know there's 100 interviews for me to go through here, and I'm only through 5, but I've had this flash of inspiration, right? I think I know why people become teachers, right? So you might not, and you might think that's straight on. After 15 interviews, you might go, oh, forget that. This is the real reason. Yeah. So, or add this reason. And so then analytical. So you can talk about how your reasoning has been going. You're shifting between inductive and deductive reasoning. So we did that big word, epistemology, right? We did that big word about, what is reality, right? And does it depend on the person seeing it? What is deductive reasoning and what is inductive reasoning? I think we've all done mathematical proofs by induction, haven't we? Works for n, see if it works for n plus 1, and then we go, hallelujah, we think it works for everything, right? So that's going from the specific to the general. So inductive reasoning is going from the specific to the general. I do it all the time, right? If I talk to 2 or 3 of you here, I sort of then make a leap as to what all of you might be thinking, right? But of course, you don't know that until you talk to everyone, but it's inductive reasoning. So another example is when I'm in a group where people have got colds, I've noticed that I catch a cold. Yeah. So that's a very specific. So, but then I make this inductive reasoning and I say that maybe colds are contagious. Yeah. Maybe they're contagious, right? So that's inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning. Well, we know that Sherlock Holmes does a lot of deductive reasoning, right? So all mammals have backbones. Yeah, all mammals have backbones. Humans are mammals. What do you deduce? All mammals have backbones. Humans are mammals. Therefore, humans have Yeah. So you got it going from the general to the specific. So all mammals have backbones is the very general. And then humans are mammals. It's very general. But then we deduce from that humans have backbones. Yeah, all mammals have backbones. Humans are mammals. Therefore, we deduce that humans have backbones. Yeah. So that's deductive. Yeah, that's what elementary, Dr. Watson, Holmes would say, elementary. Okay, so that's the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. Some of the stuff you've got to, these new words, you've got to hear a few times before it sinks in. Yeah, so you might come away today thinking, okay, I know there's a difference. I know there's a big word he used at the beginning, epistemology, right? And that's about how you view the world. And I know there's different ways of reasoning, inductive and deductive, but you mightn't quite be there yet. Sometimes you've got to hear these words several times, right? Before it actually sinks in. That's normal. That's completely normal. Don't think, oh, I can't quite get it. It's very normal. So, yeah, the memos are something that make it very rigorous, make qualitative research very rigorous and demanding. My colleagues who get these high R-squared for predicting returns, they would be very embarrassed if they were held to the same standards as a qualitative researcher, right? If they had to write down not only all the variables they tried that didn't succeed, but they get their students as part of a 40% assignment in their class to try and get the best prediction of return. So the students are out trying, you know, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of millions of variables to try to come up with the best one to predict returns, right? So they would be very, very embarrassed if they had to report all the variables that were tried and discarded in order to get their 20% R squared. Okay, people criticize qualitative research by saying, well, wait a second, you know, us empirical people, us quantitative people, we do random sampling. Yeah. Well, first of all, that sort of would imply you pick people at random. You go to the electoral roll or what else? The telephone book. Yeah, the electoral roll of the telephone book or something like that. Even they wouldn't be random, right? Because not everyone's in the telephone book and not everyone registers to vote. So bearing that in mind, these people, empirical people, don't do that at all. You go and look at a study and they're often on a specific topic. There's 1,000 papers on takeovers. They just don't go and look at companies at random. They only go, it's very purposeful. They only go and look at companies that are involved in a takeover, right? So that's not a random sample, right? They've gone and done a purposeful sample, and which is what is done in qualitative research. It would be silly to do research on a financial disaster where you pick people at random and none of them have been involved in the financial disaster. What deep insights would you get from that? Far better to get the investors, financial planners, and regulators that were involved in the financial disaster. Yeah? And it doesn't mean within that category you can't be random, right? But the study, the sample is purposeful because you're trying to get, you know, you make sure the people have got the knowledge of what you're talking about, and you're trying to get the deep insight. Yeah. So I would say there's no difference between the sampling in qualitative and the sampling in these empirical studies. Yeah. They're purposeful studies. There's no point studying takeovers if you've got a bunch of companies that weren't involved in a takeover. It's too ridiculous to even discuss. There's a man called James Heckman who came up with a way to correct for sample selection bias, right? So if your sample you think isn't representative of a normal population, you can use Heckman's two-step procedure. One is to see how your sample, you know, compares with the general population. Yeah, from that you get something called Heckman's lambda, and then with any test you do afterwards, you include Heckman's lambda, and that accounts for the sample selection bias. Yeah, so that adjusts the coefficients. So you get a coefficient that adjusts for the probability of the firms in your sample being included in the sample. And for that work, which is incredibly simple and straightforward to use, James Heckman got a Nobel Prize. Yeah. So he's a giant in the field, but he came up with something that was so simple to use that everyone can use it. And he used it for very noble purposes. One of the things he was very interested in is if you want to improve a child's lot in life, yeah, a child's future in life, when should you do an intervention? For example, in America, you know, America is very rich, but it's also very poor, right? So a lot of people are very poor in America, and they need an intervention. So when should be the intervention? You know, when they're at high school, when they're at middle school, when they're at beginning of school. Well, it turns out as early as possible, right? As early as possible, you know, 12 months, 18 months, right? So this, you know, Heckman was able to use his sample selection bias correction to figure out when you needed to make an intervention to make a difference in a child's lot, a child's happiness in the future. So interviewing, you're not even paying attention, right? Because you think you know how to talk to people. This is not going to be a problem for you, right? Why doesn't he do something that's going to be more relevant, right? Because I already know how to talk to people. Well, this is a lot harder than you think, right? So it seems straightforward, but it really brings you back. For example, I have a hypothesis, right, that if your vocation in life, right, my vocation in life is helping, teaching people how to do research, right? And if your vocation matches your job, yeah, and my job is teaching people how to do research, then you're going to be a very happy person, right? And I'm the happiest person you've ever met. So that's my hypothesis, but I've got no way, I don't know how to test it, right? I don't know how to test it. I think if I went to test it, I'd have to ask a bunch of leading questions. I don't think you'd know what I'm talking about. Why do you do this job? I don't think you're going to say it's because of my vocation. You're going to tell me some other reasons, right? Or if I asked you, what's your vocation, what's your job? And then, I go, and you're not going to link the vocation to the job, right? So I would have to ask leading questions. I would have to go hunting for your answer. And I'm just looking at this slide, and it says I can't do that. I can't ask leading questions, and I can't hunt for the answer, right? So you've just got to let them talk. The best interviews are you follow the protocol, you've got research questions, that's led to your interview questions, then you just got to let the person talk, yeah? You can't go leading them, yeah? You can't go leading them. You can't go hunting for the answer you want. But don't you want to say something about, I hear what you say, and it's very important, you're talking about X, but don't you want to say something about Y? Well, if they wanted to say something about Y, they would have said something about Y. So you can't go hunting. So it's also, when you've got the person in front of you, it's probably silly to ask them, dichotomous questions, yes or no, because you want to get the insight under things, right? So just asking yes or no could be a lot of reasons, right, why they say yes or no, right? I didn't have the beef. Did you have the beef for lunch? And they say no. You go, okay, you write down, I think they're vegan. But they might not be a vegan, right? They might not be a vegan, okay, and avoid questions with hidden meaning. So, and this can be subtle, right? If I asked you how much, education is so important, right? How much would you invest in your education? Well, you might give me a very positive response, right? Because I use the word invest. But what about if I use another word that has hidden meaning? How much debt would you take on to gain your education? Yeah, how much debt would you be prepared to be in? Well, that's a very negative connotation. I bet if I ask the question, invest, using the invest word, which is very positive, versus asking a question using the debt word, I'd get very different responses, yeah? So you might think you're asking the same question, yeah, because you're asking how much they'd spend on their education, but, not only questions can have hidden meaning, but words can have hidden meaning. So that's very important for you to remember, yeah? So you think you know how to talk to people, but guess what? You're not understood all the time, and I don't understand people all the time, right? They're sure we have a conversation and we're sure we know what the other person said, and they're sure they know what we said, because they have their own versions of reality. I wrote a book on qualitative research. I'll talk to you about it at the end of this session. But I wrote it with a guy called Dan. I just call him Killer Kowalski, but Dan. And we had a really good conversation about qualitative research. I was initially learning. Some of my PhD students wanted to do qualitative research, and I was learning about it. And he was a guru, and his partner was a guru on qualitative data analysis software, specifically on NVivo, which we'll talk about. So, I told him I was eager to learn, and yes. And he, and I said, essentially I do observational stuff, right? Meaning I look at the market prices and so on. But of course, observational studies are, they're qualitative as well, right? Where you sit in the coffee shop and observe people, or sit in this workshop today and observe people, right? People down the back can observe a lot more. I can see them taking notes. I think they're doing a qualitative study on all of us, right? So be careful. So anyway, we had a conversation. In my reality, I was signed up for his online course in Florida, right? He's doing an online course for Florida University. In his mind, yeah, I was co-teaching the course with him. So imagine my surprise when I logged in on the first day to the online course on Florida, and he and I were listed as the teachers, right? So that just shows you that a whole conversation can have hidden meaning, right? So he thought that I was co-teaching this course with him, and I thought that I was signed up as one of the students in the course, right? So your communication with people mightn't have gone as you think. It just so happened to be a objective check here, right? Because the course started, right? But even with Duke, I have a conversation, and she has a conversation with me, but oftentimes what she hears, yeah, is completely different to what I've said, and vice versa, right? And that must happen a lot in your life. You must notice that. If you don't notice that, then you're missing some of the subtleties, right? And it's very important in a relationship to, oftentimes there's tension and fights because the other person doesn't really know what you mean, and you don't understand, because in your reality, you've been very clear about what you said, but in their reality, you've said something that's horribly wrong. Okay, so this is part of the rigorous nature of qualitative research, right? So the first thing you need is, the first thing to note is you've got to be very clear on your research question, yeah, and your theoretical viewpoint. So the theoretical viewpoint comes from where you are on that continuum. Are you someone who thinks that there's only one objective reality, or do you concede that different people have different realities, right? So you're clear about the research question, you're clear about your theoretical orientation. So you got the research question. So now what the editors like to see is that you tie each of the interview question to the research question. So here, this is a research question. It's got 3 parts to it. And these are all of the interview questions, right? And they're all tied to their respective research question. So that's the first thing that the editors want to see. This is very, rigorous. You've got to tie down the questions you ask to your research question. You're not just asking them, did they have a good weekend, right? All your questions are dedicated to your specific research question. So you really can't use these interviews for anything else, right? These interviews are only good for that one project, the research question that you're studying. So the next thing is the editor doesn't want you to come up with your findings, right? They want to feel that they're part of the process, and they want to feel that you did the process right. So you analyze your interviews, and minimum 30 plus, right? Minimum 30 plus for a PhD student. If you're a continuing academic, they might want to have 70 plus, right? So and why so few? Well, it's very hard to arrange and do these interviews, right? So people understand that 30 plus for a PhD student might cut the mustard. So they like to see you iterating on themes. So what are the initial themes that come out of the interviews? And as I said, you might have 20 or 30 initial themes. Then they'd like to see you go to the next stage where you combine some of those initial themes and you have intermediate themes, maybe 10 or 15. And then finally, you iterate. Again, we're doing research triangulation. You iterate to the final themes. It might be 3 to 5. So here's an example from that Amphara, and I really like that article from the editors from Amphara. Initial themes down the bottom, intermediate themes, and then the final themes. Now, personally, I do it the other way around. I do the initial themes at the top, intermediate themes in the middle, and final themes down the bottom. Yeah. Going back to this, so this is why it's important that this is where the researcher triangulation comes in. So you might have come up with one lot of intermediate themes, but your fellow researcher are different. So then you discuss, back and forward until you agree on a list of intermediate themes, and the same for final themes. So how do you come up with the themes? So I've written down there scissors and sorts. So you go through the transcript and you can cut out, something that they've said, which is a theme, and you start doing every time a participant says it, you just keep adding to the list. As I'm saying that, the wind is blowing my hand. So I'm getting worried about doing scissors and sorts, because not only am I tying up this table, but if someone opens the windows, all my research might be blown away. So that's why people use qualitative data analysis software, because you're essentially doing the same thing, but you're doing it in the computer, right? So no one's going to open the door and blow it away, right? And you're not taking up the table space. So essentially, and the software gives you some other advantages like word clouds and things like that, right? But essentially they're the same. If you're only doing the one qualitative study in your whole life, scissors and sort is fine. Yeah. But if you're going to do a bunch of them, then it's worth learning, one of these qualitative data analysis software. And Vivo was introduced in Australia. It's in its 15th, 17th version. I think I can't keep track of it. $500, 1 day workshop, and you learn how to use NVivo. My colleague that was the expert in teaching NVivo doesn't use NVivo anymore. She's using something else. I'm not sure what it is, but there's lots of data out there. University of Queensland, where I'm also a professor, I'm an emeritus professor at University of Queensland. They come up with something called LexiMancer. And LexiMancer just takes your transcripts, and if you know how to use it, it comes up with your themes for you, right? And you can imagine with the advances in artificial intelligence that LexiMancer will just get better and better, right? But at the moment, the dyed-in-the-wool qualitative research people would love you to do the scissors and sort, right? And and they're happy for you to use NVivo because they feel that you're just doing the same thing. They wouldn't be quite happy with you using LexiMancer. But obviously, if you tell AI, here's 30 transcripts, please come up with the common themes, right, around the topic of, well, it'll do a pretty good job of it, right? And it'll only get better and better, right? So LexiMancer was used machine language, and it started like 20 years ago, but you can imagine it or other versions of it will just get better and better, right, as you go along. So in your career, as you advance, this is one area where artificial intelligence might really help. And the other way it might help is if you're just a solo researcher, right? There is no other researcher. Mind you, that's very lonely. I like doing research with people because you've got something to talk about. But if you're the sole researcher, then you really can't do research triangulation. So often say, well, then treat LexiMancer as the other researcher, see what LexiMancer comes up with, and then what you come up with, and then iterate on that. So that's even better, combining, their expert opinion with that, the output of machine learning. Now, don't get me wrong, LexiMancer is tricky to use, right? So not everyone would get the same answers, for example. So you have to be quite a good user, but that might change with the advent in artificial intelligence. So the final thing that the editors like to see is, you come up with your findings. They're your final themes, the 3 to 5. So here, there's 4 findings. And the editors like to see how your findings are linked to the sources. So down the left-hand side is, the first column is interviews, focus groups, observations, documents, and then your memos, the ones we talked about, methods, analytic, reflective. Yeah. So, and then you put an X, so it's not, we're not doing an F test here like the empirical people do, but you can see the finding 1 has got 5 sources, as is finding 3. And you might say, well, maybe they're the strongest findings, you know, because it come up in so many different sources. Okay. So let me be clear as to what qualitative research is. I probably should have led with this. It's interviews, it's focus groups, it's observation. Yeah, yeah. It's not surveys, because that's quantitative. That's regarded as quantitative. So it's interviews, focus groups, observation. We haven't talked a lot about focus groups. That's where it's sort of the same as interviews, except they've got like half a dozen people in the room. Now, this can be tricky, right? There is something about getting 6 people in the room, right? And I think they call it group dynamics, right? So one person can sort of dominate, yeah, and everyone sort of stands back and doesn't say anything, right? They feel shy and you know, in front of this dominant person, and they can really sort of steer the focus group away from the core question. So with a focus group, you know, remember I said you should do the interview yourself, right? Rather than have a research assistant do it. With the focus group, first you should film it, right? Not just record it, you should film it, because that's going to help you as a researcher see the body language, see the person, if there is a person dominating it or not, yeah? And even worse, you get 2 dominating people and they're, you know, fighting back and forth, right? So film it, right? And then you capture those dynamics. And, you know, that, you know, either that or be in a, you know, one-way mirror so you can see what's going on, and hire a professional facilitator to run the focus group for you. Because this professional facilitator would have seen these dominant people trying to, take it away from what, you know, the purpose of it, you know, maybe to their favorite political ideology. I can't say it. Right. So that person, the facilitator, would be very experienced in handling a group of people. Yeah. So film it. Don't expect to get the same sorts of results you would from an interview, right? Because people are dynamic and wonderful things, and you never know what you get from a group of people. Yeah? You really never know. And it's best left in the hands of a professional. So this is that big word again, epistemology. Yeah, and we've drawn it here on the board. So yeah, these people on the left-hand side think there's only one objective truth out there, and it's just waiting to be discovered, right? Now, do we know that's wrong? Well, yes, because, you know, that objective truth was the Earth was flat. Now we know it's wrong. That objective truth was the Earth was the center of the solar system. Now we know it's not. The sun is, right? Now we know there's lots of solar systems, right? Lots of, you know, in the whole universe. So, you know, but the people observing the Earth was flat and the Earth was the center of the solar system, you know, they thought that was an objective fact, and it was an objective fact because that's what the reality was, but the reality has changed. So, you know, do witnesses to a crime see different things? Yes, they do. Does everyone over here on the right-hand side, does every single person live in a different reality? Well, they may well. They may well. I am sure if I got everyone to write a page at the end of this day, you would have experienced something different, right? There'd be differences between what each of you experience, right? So you actually, your only guide is how you perceive things. So you all would have different versions of reality. So that's that's the theory of knowledge, right? Is there one? Yeah. So you've got to be clear about what your theoretical orientation is. So there's words there: positivism, determinism, realism, rationalism. On the other side, postmodern, constructive, induction, idealism. Yep. So we could have a whole 4-year degree on what we just talked about there, right? epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How do we know what we know? So, and I wrote an article with my colleague Dan and his partner and Michelle, and talking about that, you know, the theoretical orientation, epistemology as it relates to finance. So then some examples. I'm trying to give you some finance examples. I told you about the Littner study, 1956. What he induced about dividend payment, how they determine dividend, is still in use 70 years later. And there's lots of new journals in qualitative research and finance, and existing journals are starting to publish. I talked about the surviving a financial crisis. There's papers on how how funds choose fund managers. You know, women in the industry. So the next very important thing is you can't do research using human subjects unless you get ethical approval. Now that's if you want to publish the research. You know, businesses do interviews all the time to find out, you know, what product needs are out there, but they don't need ethical approval for that because they're not going to publish it. Yeah. So what I'm going to show you is, you might think it's unnecessary bureaucracy, but I'm going to show you 3 studies, right, as we do the different methodologies, to show that even the great universities in the world have got this wrong. So the first one is Professor Milgram, Stanley Milgram at Yale University, and he was teaching obedience to authority, right? And in this setup, the participant was a teacher. You know, they call them in and say, okay, you're going to be a teacher. These are just members of the public. So in the room with the participant was a person in a white coat with a clipboard. Yep. He was part of the experiment. He worked for the experiment. In the other room, there was a student who was part of the experiment. And the teacher would ask a question. And of course, the student invariably gets a question wrong, as we all do, because we're learning. But then the teacher had to push a button administering an electric shock. Yeah. So, you know, and as he do that, the student would scream, right? Or at least there was a scream I meant. And then, of course, the student would get more and more questions wrong until ultimately got a question wrong, and the vice said 450 volts, caution, 450 volts to be administered. And we all know that 450 volts is going to kill you, right? The electrical system is either 120 or 240. So 450 is going to kill you. So some of them just pushed it straight off, right, killing them. But of course, they were part of the deal. Some of them hesitated and said, well, I don't want to do this. That's going to kill them. And they'd look at the person in the white coat, and the person in the white coat would look up from their clipboard and say these words: it is necessary for the experiment. And they push it. 2/3 of the people gave the killing electric shock. Right? 2/3, 66%. And so obedience to authority. Now, thinking about harm to people, well, these people might feel very, you know, bad about themselves when they found out that, you know, what they did, right? You know, that you shouldn't be killing someone, right? Especially in so they would have needed, you know, and of course it wasn't provided, some psychological counseling, right? So when, you know, the university and the public heard about this, they said, well, you know, you can't do these sorts of experiments, right? Because you're doing harm to the participants. Yeah. Now, believe it or not, this has been replicated many times over the years. They're not publishing it. And they find the same thing. 66%, 2/3 of people will give the killing charge. And they've even made this into a movie. You can find this as a movie. In fact, 2 of these have been made into movies. One of them is starring Winona Ryder, who's quite a famous actress. Where to from here? Oh, well, I love Pratt. It's a very good textbook. Yeah, it's really good. And Farah really made a difference to me, right? What the editors were looking for. Silverman is sort of the godfather of qualitative research. He must be 90 plus years, and he goes around all around the world trying to help people with their qualitative research, especially the young, PhD students. So he's an amazing man. Oh, sorry, it's Patton is my favorite. Patton, the book on qualitative research. And of course, I've got my own article there, and I've just written a new book. I've just written a new book on qualitative research in finance, right? So which is useful for finance people. I'll click on that. We mightn't be on the internet. Oh yeah, we are. That's the good thing about being at a do you like the cover of this one? Is it similar to this one? Let's see.
Show double.
No, it's okay. No,
I mean, look, I can do, but
no.
I see if it's on the screen.
No, don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's important about showing you that is that the foreword to the book was written by a former president of the American Finance Association. That's the #1 association. That's right. That's okay. And an editor of the Journal of Finance, which is the top. So what they are saying is it's now time that finance does qualitative research. So moving away from empirical study to also having qualitative research. So it's very good for them, the president of the Finance Association and the editor of the top journal saying, well, this is the way, this is the line in the sand, right? We need to start thinking about, doing qualitative, having different tools in our belt other than hammers. Okay, qualitative research, a lot there. So what's the state of the art? You can see how demanding and rigorous it is, all that triangulation. What the editors are looking for, I think they're pretty clear. Yeah, some good examples and where to from here. That's what we're talking about. So, yeah, definitely Q&A. And then we've got some group work, right, where you can look at these over 100 interview responses. They're only short, by the way, and come up with initial themes, intermediate themes, final themes. But what I want you to do is to write down the top 3 final themes, and I'll get you all to write them down. Yeah, or everyone writes them down before we start discussing. And I bet you there's going to be a lot of overlap, right? Because the research of triangulation really works amongst groups. And that's how we show how, systematic and replicable this type of research is, right? Because if, we're going to end up with 40 groups, right? We're going to end up with, yeah, I know, but we've got online as well. So we're going to we're going to end up with 40 groups, and I bet just about all 40 groups come up with the same 3, right? That's how powerful research of triangulation is, right? So it really is amazing, right? So, and it really shows how rigorous these methods are. So if there's no questions, we can go straight into it. I'll tell you what page we're on.
John, in online, do you want me to create a breakout room?
Randomly put them into groups of 5. So.
A group of 5? Okay, yeah. No,
Well, it depends on how many are there. If it's,
100 over there.
But even an odd number, so 4 or 5.
Yeah. All right. So what I do is I take just screenshot of that page and send to the yellow group. For those who are here, if you don't have a book, then just sitting with someone who has a book, or take a photo of that page. Yeah.
So it starts on page 396. So you can work on this until 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, and then we'll come get you to come back. Now, you're not turning around and doing a group.
Yeah, so everyone, the front one, the line number 1, 3, 5, 7. You stand up, get your chair and turn around and face the table. 2, 4, 6, 8. You got me? Yeah. So we have a group of 4. Right? Yes. Yeah, maybe 1, 2. So your group is 2 persons. Or you can join, them. Yeah. So 1 join 2, 3 join 4, right? 5 join 6. So you move.
Oh, it's 10, sorry, 10:12, so we got till 10:30. My watch was giving me the wrong time, so you got till 10:30 for the. Did something wrong. I opened the room, now they're closing.
This okay.
That's open again. Okay.
Yeah, that they will close in 30
I
seconds.
don't want that.
No, they will. They will. So you want to close or you
No,
want?
I was trying to send a message,
But we have to wait for 20 seconds.
but I don't, yeah, I didn't want to.
You want to open again?
Yeah, I opened them,
Yeah.
but then, I did something wrong. I was sending a message, but
Yeah.
they thought I was closing them. How do I stop this?
No, you can't. You have to wait for. You have to wait for 10 more seconds.
But I don't want to put that.
I know, but there is no
So
choice.
now we open.
Yeah. So 6 seconds, and then we can open again.
So,
Right. So I text them that
Now it's closing again.
Let them do the thing.
No, but I don't, it just opens them now and closes them. It actually wasn't doing it automatically.
Okay.
Maybe try it from, what's the main computer, this one?
Yeah, the phone, my phone is the main one. Right.
Maybe you open it there.
Right, okay, now.
46 messages,
Wait, let I make that one be composed.
48 messages, they're not happy.
It's okay, what you have to, right, now I give that one is a host now.
So tell them I've got till 10 to.
Yeah,
I'll say,
okay, or maybe just let them do the breakout. Let them chat in the big group.
the big one. Okay.
Now they don't understand the requirement, so then you may want to copy the requirement now for the online to do. Wait a minute. Yeah, just for the online.
Yeah, so for the online people, we're trying to get you into groups. There's something funny going on with the computer here. So we want you to look at the responses from the 100+ teachers on page 396 of the book, and come up with the top 3 responses. So you have until 10:30 to do so. Yeah. So we're going to try to form the groups now, and hopefully it doesn't break you out again.
The if you don't have the book, the PDF or the screenshot of the book, 4 pages have been sent into the yellow group. Yeah. So everyone, if you don't have the book, right, you can check in the yellow group for the exercise.
Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to go in the groups here and it won't close. It's been closing automatically for some reason.
Let's be close. Okay.
I open them and then they say it's complete. I'll let you do it.
Correct. Rồi bây giờ các anh chị online mình sẽ chia phòng nha. Các anh chị sẽ được chia phòng tự động nha. Đúng rồi. Không phải kết thúc, chỉ kết thúc exercise thôi. Đúng rồi.
Working?
Yeah, working.
How come it didn't work?
I'm not sure. So what I moved is I moved the option to also end Zoom. And so I just informed them. Yes. I just informed them and then yeah. You want something? You want something? Want something? Orange juice, anything enough? Your water, yeah.
There's another 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I inform them. 5 phút nữa nha các bạn.
The Wi-Fi, yeah.
Here, talk. The IEP conference and password 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 2 times.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do, yeah, we're going to do that. Here, oh, you do? Okay. What I'd like you to do, each group write down the top three, reasons, top three findings on why people become teachers, okay? Each group write it down and then you hand it in. Yeah, so write down on a piece of paper the top three reasons why people become teachers, and Duke will come around and collect, and then after the break we'll go through and see whether they're all similar. Okay, so on a piece of paper write down the top three, and as you go for the break put them here so we have them. Okay,
Write down the piece of notebook, piece of paper, the top three, and then write the name of everyone, the group name on that piece of paper.
and one per group, and drop it here at the front. So we'll take take a break and come back at 11 o'clock. Yeah, everyone here understand? So I get each group to write down the top 3 reasons why people become teachers and send it in the group chat. Send it in the group chat. So once you've done that, we'll take a break until 11 o'clock. Yeah, so everyone on Zoom, right? Each group should write down the top 3. Yeah, and then yeah, and put it in the chat box. Yeah, thank you. And then we'll have a break and until 11 o'clock, and then we'll go through what each of the groups have come up with.
Rồi các bạn nghe nè, mình sẽ nghỉ 20 phút cho đến 11 giờ. Rồi, trong thời gian nghỉ đó mỗi nhóm sẽ Thắng có cầm một tờ giấy thì các bạn sẽ viết top 3 team của một group, một tờ giấy thôi, rồi nộp lên bàn đây trước 11 giờ. Rồi, khi các bạn nghỉ đến 11 giờ vào đây, ban tổ chức sẽ điểm danh và những bạn nào vào trễ sau 5 phút sẽ bị xem là vắng mặt session đó nha. Và nếu như bạn có đăng ký certificate thì mình sẽ giữ certificate lại của bạn để làm kỷ niệm. Rồi, các bạn online cũng vậy nhé. Các bạn sẽ quay lại vào lúc 11 giờ và ban tổ chức sẽ điểm danh, mở camera. Nếu các bạn không có thì Đức cũng sẽ rất là vui được giữ lại certificate của các bạn nha. Then I text to the
Top 3. Chat. 11 o'clock. 11. 11. Come back at 11. Yep. You're first. You get a special award.
You bring your book here. Come inside. No, only one book. Later. Get one.
Otherwise, I get too tired.
Yeah. I'm so honored. Right. So the
Anything
first
you would like me to write?
I'm the first. So honored.
First.
Wow. Just no, later one. Not come with
Later.
Come with two.
Oh my goodness.
From your break, don't side until the even, yeah.
Okay.
Không biết được phải thầy nghĩ cuối này thì có.
Very keen. They're still triangulating. The researchers are still triangulating.
They put in a chat if you want to.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you. Right. Oh, you got more than 3. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask where can we get the book? Because
We'll talk to Ruby outside. Ruby's outside the desk.
thank you.
Xong cái tin nhắn có nghĩa là đây là không có nếu phải tham gia đầy đủ đặt môn toán và không bên kia còn gặp thì cái mà cái này em cũng là người tàu
Yes, yeah. You'll make a decision whether you pick that up. Right, so you're talking about the big question of causation, right? So we're going to cover that in period, how you would be having, and also from. So it's a big question. Anytime you do empirical work, the big question is that thing you identify, is it a causal factor? That's right. So when we go and test this, we might find association, but that doesn't mean causation. I'll show you how to find experiments or empirical studies. Thank you. Wow, lots.
Also, I would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so when to the sampling for quality, for example, yeah, for quality.
Yeah, so as in all, in the empirical studies, it's got to be purposeful. So for a PhD student writing a chapter and a thesis, probably 30 plus. 30, and for a established researcher, the editors might want 70 plus. 70. That's right. You might get saturation at 40 and maybe satisfy the editor by saying, these are the themes I got in the initial, and the curve goes up and up and up, and all of a sudden it flattens out. You're not getting any new themes with 41, 42, 43. So something so just proving, you want to prove when you're doing a PhD, you just want to prove you can do it. So they want to see though that you've done something 30 plus, 30 plus, but for when you're a mature researcher, and we just want to see functions, etc. That could be 7 plus. And it depends if you're iterating on the participants, right? The financial planners, the investors, the regulators there. You have to have enough of each of those 3 groups, right? So you might need more there. So just looking at the investors. No, but it's just more. You need to have probably more than 30 because you have to have a sufficient number of investors. You probably have less financial regulators because there's less financial regulators and less market financial advisors because there's less of that. So you have more investors than you have financial planners and more financial planners than you have regulators. So probably only 1 or 2 regulators. Oh, yeah, also my big education is teaching people how to do research, but I can't do that unless I'm researching myself. Every year, we have a Dropbox for all the national PhD courses. Every year we update because I want you to have to say the art. So the only way we know that is by doing PhD. So, sure, send me an email. Send me an email. Professor Thompson. Yeah, there's so many enough. Yeah, we send you an email. Sure. Oh.
Yeah. I remind everyone to sign the paper. Yeah. Rồi mời tất cả các bạn vào lớp và các bạn bây giờ những bạn nào chưa điểm danh, mình sẽ có điểm danh sau mỗi giờ giải lao và trước cái buổi mà sắp tới, do đó bây giờ mình vào lớp rồi. Các bạn nào mà chưa, Đức sẽ truyền cái tờ giấy điểm danh thì các bạn sẽ ký vào cột ghi chú 2 nha. Đó là điểm danh, cái K là K 11 giờ. Rồi, bạn nào chưa kịp điểm danh á mà thiếu á là KBERI giữ certificate lại, ráng chịu nha. Rồi, và các bạn online thì bây giờ mở camera để cho ban giám thị sẽ điểm danh qua camera của các bạn online nhé.
So 101. Yeah, 101. Oh, we're not quite ready to start yet. It's 10:59. We've got to wait till 11. Are we fining anyone 100,000 baht if they come in late to go to charity, flood charity? Duke? Are we fining anyone that comes in late? Duke? Are we fining anyone that comes in late for charity?
No, we didn't apply,
Ah,
but we will keep their certificate.
Okay.
If they like 15 minutes.
Okay, they won't get a certificate. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It's other.
Can they do 1,000 word essay? Okay. Yeah.
Or they can write 1,000 word,
Yeah.
a reflection.
Yeah.
What they have learned today.
What if they've been naughty? Will it have to be 2,000 words? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's fine.
Yeah. I think I've seen one or two naughty people. Yeah. Yeah.
So if it's naughty and if it's not listening, Tom will give you 2,000 word homework.
Yeah.
A reflection.
Yeah.
Simple.
Everyone will have a different reflection. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's get started. So we had about 20 groups here in the room and about 20 groups on online, right? And you had over 100 interviews to look at, right, from the teachers. And each group of the 40 come up with basically the same 3 reasons, right? So it's an amazing verification of the power of triangulation, right? You were doing researcher triangulation. So not only, your group come up with these 3 and you reached a conclusion, but every other group come up with 3 and they were basically the same. So I wrote them down, right? Different words: support, love, care, encourage children. Yeah. So people use different words. Making a difference in the world, right? That was a big one that come through. And then, you yourself being inspired by a great teacher that you had, or, role models, your parents, etc., some sort of tradition in the family. Now, you can never underestimate the power, that inspiration of a great teacher. Now, in your whole career, your whole life, you mightn't have, every teacher's not got to be an inspiring teacher. I think I can only point to 1 or 2, yeah, in my whole career. My oldest daughter was lucky enough to have an inspiring teacher in her kindergarten year, yeah. So he encouraged her to do, what's that thing? It's self-defense. I want to say yoga, but it's judo. Right. And also, she was reading at a high school level in kindergarten. And he said that, she was going to be so good, she'd certainly go to university and come to her graduation. His name was Mr. Clifford. So she was lucky enough to have, inspiring teacher in her very first class, kindergarten. But some of us might go, long way and not have an inspiring teacher. I hope that you have had one in your education, right? Because they can really make a big difference. And, they can inspire you to become a teacher, and so can your family and friends. So those reasons, those 3 are very altruistic. You're doing something for others. But also, this is a reason that kept coming up in all the groups as well, that it's a good gig. You get good hours, you get good school holidays, things like that. But they're mainly given by reasons. That reason is mainly given by people that don't understand how hard it is to be a teacher, right? Because you really don't have much free hour, right? So you're working all the time, thinking about your students all the time. But amazing, 40 groups. Yeah, we looked at all the submissions here. We looked at the chat from the groups online, and it just really shows how powerful researcher triangulation is. So it's very systematic and scientific. So you make sure when you're writing up your research, you say that you use the triangulation, the researcher triangulation, also the data triangulation, if possible, the participant triangulation, right? For example, the investors, financial planners, and regulators, yeah? And, the data triangulation, as we talked about. But the researcher triangulation to iterate on themes is very important, as it is also in coming up with, the questions that link up with the research question. Okay, so now we're going to start on systematic lit reviews. Yep. And we're on page 165 of the book. 165. So yeah, remember, just to remind you, these are the notes. What's in the book there are the notes that are used in the national PAC course, where people from all around Australia and New Zealand do the course. They're updated every year. Yeah, so you get the modern state of the art, the current, what the editor's looking for, yeah, and the current good examples and where to from here. So as you can imagine, for someone in my position, every year I read many theses, many proposals, and many papers. And the thing that I dread most in reading is the lit review, right? Why do I dread that? Because they're normally so boring. Yeah, it's just a paragraph on one paper, then a paragraph on another paper. And it's just boring as anything, right? So the question is there a way to write an interesting, informative literature review, right? But most importantly, that is systematic and replicable, right? So of all the fields, this is the one that's changed the most, yeah, over recent years. And it all goes down to a academic who was a librarian. He was a librarian, and his name was Eugene Garfield. Yeah? And Eugene Garfield come up with this whole idea of impact factors for journals. So before he came up with that, no one knew that Nature and Science were the best journals, right? They have impact factors of 50, 60. Whereas, your field journal, the journal in your field might only have an impact factor of 5 or 6. But Nature and Science had incredible, any articles in there were cited, not read by, but cited by 50 plus people. So he also come up with how research is interlinked. So he come up with a co-citation network, right? And this co-citation network will give in chronological order, the seminal work, and then all the papers that cite it, yeah? And it'll have nodes and connectors. And the more the paper is cited, the bigger the node, yeah? So this is a Eugene Garfield co-citation network. Now, so good is his co-citation network that when Google was looking for a search engine, they used his co-citation network, right? So this humble librarian has had a big impact in the world, not least of which is in your Google search, right? But he also makes it hell for academics, right? Because the deans and presidents all want you to publish in the journals with the high impact factor, right? And they have these metrics now, courtesy of Eugene Garfield. So there's two things I want to talk about, right? There's two sorts of literature review, right? Mainly, I'm going to talk about a standalone literature review that you might have as a chapter in your thesis, or you might prepare as an article to send off to a journal. And because journals love literature reviews, right? And a lot of journals publish them because they give the journals a lot of sites, and they can get a higher impact factor using Eugene Garfield's impact factor score. So again, Eugene Garfield comes in here, right? So that editors love to publish systematic lit reviews because that gets the journal a lot of sites. So, but you also, in a paper you send to the journal, just a regular paper, you normally have a discussion of the literature up front. So I'll talk about that first, right? But here, there's not a lot of space. You might only be able to dedicate half a page or a page and a half of the article at most, right? To a literature review. So here's my idea for that, right? And it's an analogy. Think about you running a dinner party, right? Do you run dinner parties here? Invite people to your home, right? So the first question is how many people to invite? It's a proper sit-down dinner party. Well, that's got to be determined by how big your table is, right? If you're like most people, your table only holds 6, Yeah, 2 each side, 1 on each end. Yeah, so that's the half page. That's like in the journal where you're only allowed half a page. Other people have bigger tables, so they might be able to take 8, 3 on each side and 1 on each end. And other people might be able to take like 10, 5 on each side and then 1 on each end, right? It's unusual unless you're a king or a lord to have a table that'll take like, 20 or 30. Yeah. So we've probably got, 6, 8, 10. So that's how many you can invite to your dinner party, right? So you obviously in a paragraph or a page and a half can't write a paragraph on each, right? So the question is, okay, we decided how many to invite. So the next question is, where are you going to seat them, right? Well, I assume you sit at one end of the table, and on your right, maybe you put the people who agree with your, the proposition in your paper. Maybe the other end to you, you have the person who wrote the seminal paper. All right, so I might have Sharp. I can't have Lintner because he's dead, but I could have Sharp. He's still alive, right? So that's surprising. And on the left, I might have the people that disagree, with my position in this paper, So there, I've decided how to seat the people. On the right, the people that agree with me. Down the other end, I've got Bill Sharp, who wrote the initial paper, the seminal, and he's further away from me because that seminal paper is further away from the current research now, right? So someone asked me before, am I still doing research? And then when I said I was, they said, well, they'd like to join my research group. But of course, if I'd said no, they wouldn't want to, right? Because, the person is not doing the research, it's too far away. So Sharp is down the other end, furthest from me, but he's in a place of respect, but he's further away from the existing research at the moment. And on the left, I have the people who disagree with me. So now, 3 ways to run the dinner party. The third thing is, how are you going to run the dinner party? Well, remember, it's your dinner party. So one way, and this is the way that most people write their half page, full page, page and a half lit review, is go around the table one by one and get everyone to talk about themselves for 3 minutes. So 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. And that's what a paragraph on each paper, right? And it's incredibly boring, right? And I'm reading through it and going, oh my God, will it ever end? Will it end? Another way to do it is to go around the opposite way, the people who disagree with you, and spend a minute criticizing them, right? And by the time you get the seminal person, you're in the habit of criticizing, so you criticize them as well, and then you criticize the people that are on your side. Well, that's rare to see that, but one of the reasons it's rare to see that is these people are likely to be the reviewers on your paper. So if all you've done is criticize them, they're going to say, I'm not going to accept this paper, and the paper's got to get it rejected, right? So here's the third way, and this is what I'd love you to do. The dinner party, it's your dinner party, so it should be you, right? So you'd talk about your research and you bring in the people as they're relevant. You say, I am fascinated by asset pricing, thanks to Bill Sharp. Yeah. And what I'm studying here is this aspect of asset pricing that these guys studied. These guys didn't think it was relevant, but it's proved to be a great success. I'm not using the method that these people on my left use because, this guy, Hansen, come up with a better method, and I'm using that. Yeah. And my results are different from, the guy on my left, but they align quite well with these guys' results in a different context. Bingo. That's the end of your research. And you've just talked about your research, right? All you've done is talked about your research, and you brought in the people as they relate to what you're doing, what your method is, what your findings are. Yeah. So that's the way to do it. And people look at that and go, oh, it's fantastic. And you're not wasting half page or a page and a half. You're reinforcing the story in the mind of the editor and the reviewers. You're definitely tying in with the literature. So that's the way you should do a short literature review. But the majority of what I'm going to talk about now is when you've got a standalone chapter in a thesis or a standalone paper, which is just a literature review. So the thing that's changed is it's not just going to be a list of papers that you were given or heard about doing your undergrad, master's, and PhD, right? It's a systematic, yeah? What that means is then, given your research question, you will go to a global database, yeah? Global library, like the Web of Science, or Scopus, right? You've heard of those? All your libraries will have subscriptions to those. So given your research topic, you will come up with a list of keywords to search. And you can use all the Boolean operators and or, and you do an advanced search. And coming up with the keywords, you would triangulate with another researcher, right? You'd come up with some keywords you think are relevant to this topic. They would come up with some keywords, and then you'd triangulate to come up with the best keywords. Yeah. So what that means is, if any other researcher came along looking at this research question, yeah, they would go through the same process of coming up with keywords and triangulate. And as we know from our teacher surveys, they would come up with teacher interviews, they would come up with the same keywords. Yeah. Given that they put the same keywords into the Web of Science or Scopus, they would come up with the same papers. So you see that this is replicable, yeah, systematic and replicable science. Yeah? So that's a big deal. So another researcher with the same research question will likely come up with the same keywords. Since they're using the same database, they'll end up with the same papers. Yeah. So this is very systematic, and so it's scientific. So Thomson Reuters Web of Science. Here's an example. My colleague, Professor Martina Linenlucker, who's at University of Technology, Sydney. Very simple keyword search. She just searched for resilient, but it could have been, resiliency, and, so she used what's known as some wild cards. Yeah. So the asterisks cover other letters, yeah, other things that might appear. She wanted to research corporate resilience. There's another field of research known as personal resilience. You look around the world, there's some terrible, unbelievable, unimaginable things that happen to individuals, but yet they carry on, right? They're amazingly resilient, people say, right? Humans are amazingly resilient. You often heard that, but that's human resilience, right? So different from that is corporate resilience, yeah, corporate resilience. So because she was looking at, business resilience, she limited the search to business management. What's happening with our Zoom people? Why can't they see the screen? Oh, because I'm not screen sharing. Was I screen sharing before? Luckily, we haven't done much on the screen, so we've got to share the screen. Let's see.
Anyone here on the Zoom?
That's right. That's right. I know.
You see the share screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Then you need to tell early. Yeah.
Yeah. Speak up. Share. Which one?
Share this one.
This one.
Yeah.
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 Apologies, Zoom people.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have to get back myself.
You okay?
No.
Yeah.
I've got to find my file. Well, it shouldn't be down here somewhere?
Yes.
I just minimized it.
I'm not sure. How can you help? Please.
We just got to get back to my PowerPoint. I minimized it, but I can't find it.
We see it, but we don't see the.
I've just got to find it here so I can know it. Oh, there. That wasn't showing up before. Yeah, okay.
No, I think you don't just make one screen.
Well, we've got to share. Yeah. Oh, I think you just closed it.
Just this one, the presentation window, this one.
That one will do. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, sharing that. And I've got it here. That's good. Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. Right. Oh, just want one page, but it'll do. It'll do. Go back one. Oh, no, it's not showing that. Okay, we want to show the screenshot there. Sorry, the slideshow. So yeah, do the slideshow. Yeah. Yeah. And now we just want one page to the. Display, yeah. Duplicate with slideshow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but is it on the screen? We're going to share the screen. Yep. Hero.
Yeah, we see it.
You got a hero. Please fit.
Yeah.
Hero. We
Let's
got it.
go with that. Let's go.
Very good. No, no more. We got it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
all right.
So good. So good. So, okay, thank you, online people, for telling us that. We want to get it right for you. So, because she was looking at corporate resilience, she limited the search to business and management journals. If she hadn't done that, then it would have gone to all the psychology and medical journals talking about individual resilience. Okay, so next thing is you've got to do data cleaning, right? So she gets all these papers on resilience from the keyword search, but some of them might not have been on corporate resilience at all, right? Some of the personal resilience may have snuck in. So then she'd have to go through and manually delete that. Yeah. And so that's part of researcher triangulation. Two or more, two researchers look at it and see whether they really should be in and not. And again, we know that, the triangulation works so well that another team of researchers would come up with the same exclusions. Then, sometimes people abbreviate the journal so that, then the software that does the co-citation mapping doesn't know it's the same journal and misses some of the linkages, some of the citations. So you've got to go and check the references in detail, make sure that there's no misspelling of the journal name, no abbreviation, right? And you should document what you do in every step, but you'd also stress that you did triangulation because that reinforces to the editor that you are being systematic and scientific. So then you do the co-citation mapping. And first, I'm going to show you Eugene Garfield's because that's the one that Google used as their search engine. So I think you got to see that my colleague used 50 or more of the most highly cited. So she may have had like 700 papers, right, in the collection when she did the keyword search. But she's only going to do a co-citation network of the most important papers, the 50 most highly cited. And for this, you'd use a package. So the original co-citation package, the basis for Google, is called HisCite, and it was developed by Eugene Garfield. But he has recently died. He lived to a very old age, and he's recently died. There's a big award, research award for like the best systematic literature review awarded each year, and it's a Eugene Garfield Award. So some of you may aspire to try to win that. And however, his software hasn't been updated since. So, but you can get a version and do it. And I really like the look of it. Some researchers in R have come up with an alternative to his site. And the good thing about that is they update this thing every week, right? So those of you who don't know how to use R, don't worry, they've actually done a shiny version of it, right? Which is, you know, almost child-proof, right, to use. So bibliometrics in R, also known as Biblio Shiny now, is amazing for, you know, and it gives you more output and graphs and statistics than you'd ever use in a paper. So this is what the historical co-citation network looks like. And this is the one, you know, of all the things you get from R, this is the one I think is the best, right? Because it helps you form the research group. The one in R, rather than going from top to bottom, goes from left to right. So here at the top is the oldest papers. Then as you go down, you get to the current papers. So here, my colleague Martina has come up with 4 different groups. Let me get rid of this. So one group here on the left, which is corporate social performance, marketing, stakeholder theory, financial performance, and greening. Yeah. So this is actually on terms of sustainability. It's not the resilience one. So I've put up the wrong map there, but you get the message. So you would have to form those groups, right? But you can triangulate. You've got the 50 papers. You can see how they cite each other. I find just by looking at the co-citations, I can see that this group is linked, this group is linked, this group is linked. So that's always my first go at coming up with a group. And then I look at each of the groups I identified, I look at each of the papers and see if they fit in or not. And if they don't, then I change the boundaries. Yeah. But another researcher also does that. So we triangulate on what these groups are. Yeah? So that's part of it. So when I'm writing up about, once I've determined these research groups, when I'm writing up about them, I'm giving an eagle eye view, right? I'm not writing a paragraph on each paper. I'm not telling you what each paper did, right? Because I want to open up a field for you, right? I want to say this field has these different research viewpoints, right? And I'll only talk about the individual papers insofar as why they fit into the group. For the details of the paper, you're going to have to go and read it yourself, right? But you don't, you know, when you're first looking at a research area, you don't want all the details. You want the bird's eye view, right? You want the program at a glance, right? Before you go and look at each individual paper, because you get lost. Yeah. So this might only be a 15 or 20 page paper, even though you're doing a systematic lit review of a whole field, right? Whole field of corporate resilience. So that's the bird's eye view. You're not writing about each individual paper. You're writing about the groups. And you'll mention the paper insofar as they work in. And you'll be a little critical, right? So I'll show you another one I did, right? So this is the top finance journals, the tier 1 journals. So Journal of Financial Economics, Review of Financial Studies, Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis. And over all time, from the beginning of time to now. And you see the seminal researcher, Sharp. Yeah, you see Sharp right up there with his Nobel Prize winning paper. He's the most important researcher. So 1974 wasn't the first time these journals started publishing. Some of them go right back to 1900, but you know, this is where it really started, right? So the influential papers started with Sharp, with his capital asset pricing model. You can see there's others in this group. I would call that unconditional asset pricing. Yeah. Then it went on to conditional asset pricing. Yeah. And then factor models, anomalies, market microstructure, over here, corporate finance. Yeah. So you can see the corporate finance is really quite distinct. You would have had no trouble in coming up with that as a separate research group. So then, you know, I talk about each group, but then I talk about, so first of all, the asset pricing, unconditional. Well, I say, well, look, it can't possibly be, it can only ever be 50% right? But other models are wrong. So this model by Sharp can only ever be at most 50% wrong, right, but everything else is wrong, right? And what I mean by that is you really do need to have conditional models, right, rather than unconditional models, right? But why these other models are wrong is for the conditional asset pricing, they look to compare, you know, predicted returns on individual stocks with predicted returns in the market. But I just told you before that all the researchers that have tried to predict returns have used 100 or more variables, and they've discarded the 95 or more that don't work, and they've just reported the 5. But when you take into account that they discarded those ones that didn't work, you have to adjust the significance level for significance, and there's no evidence of predictability. So if you can't predict returns on the left, on the dependent variable side and the independent variable side, then it's pointless relating noise to noise. So that's very critical of this whole research area. And the next one is factor models. Well, here I was very critical as well, right? Without going through each details on each paper, I said, well, look, they're trying to come up with factors outside of the capital asset pricing model market factor. But we know from the seminal papers that when you plot mean and variance, right, you do a frontier, expected returns, all of the assets can be spanned by any 2 frontier portfolios. And there's, you know, literally thousands and thousands of them. So if you're allowed to go search for factors, you'll just find a couple of those frontier portfolios. It's a mathematical tautology, right? So there's a mathematical tautology and there's a model, and people seem to, you know, confuse them. So the factor analysis just got to find factors, but that's just from definition of, you know, the mean variance frontier. The other area here is anomalies and empirical regularities. Again, I'm quite critical here because some of these anomalies show very good returns, right? For example, most hedge funds say that they're using a momentum strategy. And the momentum strategy is if your stock has done particularly well in the last 6 months, they predict it to do well in the next 6 months. So not all stocks are going to do that, but those in a group of ones that have done really well in the last 6 months, right, they seem to have higher returns in the next 6 months than those that didn't have good returns, that group that didn't have. And I'm sure that's true. They have good returns, right? But when you go to put dollar values on how much you'd earn, right, if you had bought all of the stocks in that group and held it for 6 months, you come up and you assume that all the volume in those stocks was for the purpose of the momentum strategy, you come up with the dollar profits of about $500 million, right? That's over the whole time they've been using this strategy. So you might say to yourself, $500 million is a lot of money, US dollars, but bear in mind that there's $1,000 billion hedge fund that say they're using a momentum strategy, right? So in that case, how are they splitting up the $500 million between them? It's like $1 million each, isn't it, right? So that they're not getting much dollars from the strategy. The return they're getting from the strategy is fantastic, right? And that's, they say they're doing it, right? And they are doing it, they're getting that return, but that's just to attract funds, you know, funds coming into them. And of course, where they're making their dollars, the most dollars, is somewhere else, right? But they say they're using the momentum strategy because it does have a high return, but just that they don't make a lot of dollars out of it. Then the corporate finance has proceeded one of the criticisms here is it lacked rigor, but the editors have heard that. And now when we talk about capital market studies or empirical studies, we're going to find the editors are now very demanding. And it all gets down to what someone was asking me before about causation, right? So how do you establish causation? And the editors are hot on that topic. And even when you show causation, they want more. So the bar keeps getting higher and higher. You'll notice there's a paper by Lee and Reddy right out there on the extreme right-hand side. It's not in any group, right? Lee and Reddy were two PhD students at Cornell. They'd come up with a method of matching up the trade data and the bid and ask quote data, yeah? So they come up with a method of doing it, but they were PhD students that didn't understand that you need to be part of the research conversation. You see, you need to be part of the research conversation. There needs to be a line from your paper to the other papers. And if that's the case, then there'll be a line from the other papers to your paper, right? And so they are completely out of the co-citation network. Google would never find Lee and Reddy, right? Because it's not part of the co-citation network. So they should have been referring to the papers that their method might be applicable to, right? But they didn't, right? So that paper actually belongs in the field in the middle there, market microstructure, which is essentially about how information gets into price. And you'll see the papers there all refer to a paper by Kyle, right? So that's another thing. These papers here, which are from the top 4 finance journals, they refer to other papers, right? And one of the ones that's most, when you do a cited reference check of the papers in this sample, one of the biggest papers they refer to is a paper by Kyle about how information gets into price, right? It's about informed traders. And that paper appeared in Econometrica, right? But almost if you were studying market microstructure, just using these 4 journals, you would do a cited reference check, see that most papers, the paper that was most cited by the papers in here from outside was this Kyle paper, and you would include it in the list of papers. So the first thing you do is identify these major research groups, right? And this is very valuable for the new person to this area. You identify all those areas we saw there, right? This is where the research has been. And in getting that, we triangulate amongst researchers and coming up with those research groups and drawing that graph. Now, I will tell you this, BiblioShiny does the historical co-citation. They do it from left, the oldest papers, to right, the newest, and they put different colors for what BiblioShiny thinks are the different research groups. So that is a big help, right? Except for me, I'm colorblind, so I can't tell what they. Well, anyway, I like to do it myself, right? I just look at the clumps of there's a group that are clearly, linked together by the co-citations. So, what you do is you talk about the research group. See, when I talked about those research groups before, I didn't talk about any of the specific papers really, but I had a lot to say, right? I had a lot to say about what the research group was, and also some critique of it as well. People don't want me to the editor doesn't want me to give platitudes. They want me to give me my view, right? Because they think that's valuable, what this field is. But I didn't talk specifically about any of the papers, and you shouldn't either, right? So don't just do a paragraph on each paper. Definitely don't, because I hate reading it. It's the thing I hate to see. So then that's not going to do it. That's not going to sell your paper, because the editor wants cites. And so you've talked about what has been in this area, right? What has been, but what's going to get the cites for the systematic lit review is the hints and pointers as to future research that you give to the readers, right? And that is what's going to inspire them to go and do the research that you suggest, and also to cite this paper. And look, that's good for you. But the editor, you've got to understand, the editor want sites for the articles. When they're choosing the articles, they are thinking, okay, well, just give me sites because I want to be like Nature and Science. I want to have an impact factor of 50 or 60, right? It's only 1 or 2 at the moment, but I can build it up. And if I publish this systematic lit review, right, and has these incredible emerging research areas, yeah, then sometimes people call them bursting themes, right, if they want to make it sound better. So the papers we just looked at, they're the ones that have the highest cites. But, you know, the longer the paper's been out there, the more cites it gets, right? So it's really going to have a bias towards the older papers, right? But the emerging themes are going to come from the newer papers, say the papers published in the last 3 to 5 years, yeah? So you would look at the more recent papers and think about, well, this doesn't have a lot of size, but gee, that looks interesting. And I bet people would love to research on this. So you would identify 4 to 6 really hot, emerging, bursting research topics. Yeah? And again, for that, you'd write it up and you do triangulation with the other researcher. So Martina and I would do triangulation to come up with what were the emerging themes. Yeah? If you're writing a thesis, right, you might then, one of the emerging themes might be what you do in the next essay, yeah? And next chapter, and so on. Yeah. So again, we're doing the triangulation. So then the editor is very happy with the paper and will likely publish it. And you might find, you know, normally papers get, you know, 1 or 2 sites, but you might find that your paper's got like 1,000 sites in like just 2 or 3 years, right? It's amazing. And of course, that's good for you and your academic career. Yeah? But it's, first of all, it's got to be good for the editor because the editor is the gatekeeper who decides to publish or not. Well, there's a couple of papers from Garfield, yeah, and we've got to pay homage to this great man, a humble librarian. Jump over this page. Yeah, they're just they're looking ahead. So, you know, this humble librarian who changed the whole face of academia, right? The whole world has changed because of the development of impact factors and the co-citation network, right? So there's Professor Leonard Looker's paper on resilience. That's well worth looking at. It sort of gives you a template for the method, you know, how to write up the methodology, the research groups, the emerging themes. And she has some videos on structured literature reviews that go through the, you know, the bread and butter things like data cleaning and everything, right? So they're well worth looking at. And then she just wrote a systematic literature review with a couple of co-authors, and that's just gone off the map in terms of citations, right? And whenever she gives a Zoom session on systematic lit reviews, she gets like 500 plus people signing up. So people are really interested in knowing how to do systematic lit reviews, and people, you know, they're trying to, you know, find their way into a new area, love reading a systematic lit review. She goes to the Academy of Management meetings, and, you know, people, you know, gasp as she walks in the room. Oh, Professor Lyndon Looker, I've been thinking about something on resilience, because what they know about resilience, they'd learned from her systematic lit review, right? The one she published there in 2017. But this is the latest one, the 2020, so that's well worth reading. Yeah, that's and it goes through a lot of different methods. So, and there's you can find, just look up BiblioShiny or Bibliometrics, right? And that's that just keeps getting updated all the time, keeps getting better and better. So I'm looking at the time. Yeah, now we've got plenty of time. Any questions at this point? If not, we can go to, because we started talking about that field of corporate finance, and probably the criticism was that the methods weren't sufficiently sophisticated or rigorous enough compared with the asset pricing. So the editors have heard that. I shouldn't have said it, I guess. The editors have heard that and they've made it a lot harder. So now I've got to remember to share. Yeah, share. I've got to open first. Yeah, I know how to do it. Oh, yes. Getting published, getting published. No, that one.
That one in the afternoon.
Afternoon. Before we have a beer.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, that's good, but I didn't share.
Oh, you go and share as well.
Share first. Sharing is caring. Yeah. Okay. This one?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, my goodness. I am learning.
Right, now let them check. Yeah, I think everyone sees.
Oh, my goodness.
Did you see that is your group screen?
Yeah, that's it. And I've got to tell you what page. 289. Yep, you got it. So I must tell you that this is information you can start using immediately, right? And you'll be at the forefront of the methods, what the editors are looking for, and getting published in year one. So if you're doing some empirical work now, then pay particular attention. So if you follow what I say here, this is exactly what the editors of the tier one journals are looking for. So this has just been updated. So this is part of the press. Now, just it froze. It froze. Okay, these three men, notice they're men. Women don't seem to get the acknowledgement they're due and getting Nobel Prizes. For example, a Nobel Prize in Physics was given for the people that come up with neural networks, but the major paper there, the first author was a woman, right? And she didn't, and she's still alive, and she didn't get the prize. So, you know, it's still an issue, even with something like this. So the two people on the right, Ankrest and Embers, they got the Nobel Prize for their work on causation, you know, showing causation. And that's the big issue now with the editors. Are you showing causation? Yeah. So here's a little video there. We're not going to play the video, but you should go and have a look at it, where it's Guido Embers explaining to his children, who are like 8 and 6, what it was that he got the Nobel Prize for, right? So it's like a 2-minute video, but it's delightful, right? So he is explaining it in the most simple terms about why he got the Nobel Prize, right? So the two examples he gave were, does spending an extra year in school, yeah, so does time in school affect your income? So there happened to be, now this is important, because you do experiments to show causality, right? The reason experiments is such a big field is that it's so difficult to show causality outside the experiment lab, right? So you do an experiment to show causality. But what, you know, they're talking about are natural experiments, something that occurs in the world, yeah, that could be, so you have a treatment and control group. So a change in the school system, just as simple as October 1st versus September 30th for starting school. So you had a group of students that were 1 year longer in school than the other, right? So a natural experiment. You can't just say, you know, can't go in the world and say, okay, you people go for 13 years, you people go for 12, because you'd have all sorts of people objecting to that. But this naturally occurred, right? So it's what they call a natural experiment. And the findings were that the treatment group, the one with the extra year of school, did in fact earn extra income. So that's an okay example. I probably wouldn't be convinced of causation, So I might say, well, but just the economic conditions were a lot better when the longer group graduates. So I'd like to see a lot more of these naturally occurring. You show me one, I'd like to see 100 plus naturally occurring. Okay, this one's a bit more convincing. You know, when you win the lottery, you get like the $1 million, right? Well, in America, they have state lotteries where you don't win the lump sum, you win 25,000 a year, right? So for 20 years. So the question is, and this gets back to a big issue, right? A big policy issue about whether we should have a guaranteed minimum income, right? And there's arguments on both sides, right? The arguments for it say, well, if you have guaranteed minimum income, you then don't have to do, if you're meant to be someone important, you might have some very big entrepreneurial talent that you want to go to your garage and develop the next internet company, right? Or you want to be a famous musician or whatever, right? But you can't do that because you've got to, earn the money to pay your rent, and buy your food. So having this minimum guaranteed income will enable these people to reach great heights. And of course, that'll build wealth for the economy, and there's more for everyone. But on the pros, con side, say, oh, well, look, there's guaranteed minimum income for everyone. Who the hell's paying for it, right? If it doesn't increase new wealth, that means that everyone's getting this 25,000 a year. So it's who's paying for it? I'm paying for it because I've got a job that earns more than 25,000 a year, right? So you can see why it's quite a heated debate, right? So anyway, and the other reason is, well, if you pay someone 25,000 a year, give them this minimum income, they won't work, right? They'll say, "Oh, that's great. I'll just stay home and watch Netflix." Or if you're in Australia, I'll get in a group house with a bunch, and I'll be on the beach and I'll go surfing every day, right? So people in Australia do. They do that anyway, by the way, without the minimum guaranteed income. Anyway, it turned out that actually the people who won the lottery continued to work just the same as normal. It didn't affect their working or not. So this is the sort of thing, a natural experiment, right? You can't change institutions in society. You can't say, okay, this country is going to be socialist and this country is going to be democratic, capitalist, right? And we're going to keep you doing that for 50 years. And then we're going to compare outcomes, right? You can't do that because you can't interfere in the world like that. But you go and see that Russia has been socialist for 50 years and the US has been capitalist for 50 years. So it's a natural experiment. So you could compare outcomes. Yeah? So you have North and South Korea, right? A natural divide. You can't just divide a country and look at the outcomes, but it's there. It's a natural experiment. You had East and West Germany, right? You can't just divide a country again in terms of institutions, but there it is. It's a natural experiment. There's an awful lot of natural experiments come out of China because the Chinese government, has these development zones versus non. So you have treatment versus non-treatment. So this is it, the causation problem, right? In New York, I've been in New York and I noticed there's a lot of crime and there's a lot of police. But in Canberra, where I worked at the Australian National University, I noticed that there was hardly any crime and hardly any police. So, but are the police causing the crime or is the crime causing the police? If we just do a regression, we can't tell, right? You need to do more. And in terms of ownership and performance, a company that's got a really spread out ownership might have better performance. But on the other hand, companies that perform really well might diffuse a really broad set of owners. Banks with good capital reserves have good performance, but they might only have good capital reserves because they have good performance. Yeah. Here's a good one. Athletes, especially running the 400 meters, they might develop lactic acid, right? And that's causing their performance to deteriorate. They certainly developed lactic acid over the last 50 meters of the 400 meters, believe you me, because no one can run 400 meters at a sprint, right? But the question is the lactic acid causing the deterioration in performance, or is the lactic acid being created by your body because your performance is deteriorating and your body is trying to sustain your performance? Well, everyone thought with causation that since there was an association between deteriorating performance and the buildup of lactic acid, that the lactic acid was causing the performance deterioration. But when that was studied at the molecular level, it found out that all those years where they've been trying to stop the buildup of lactic acid, they'd got it wrong. The lactic acid was actually helping to get the last little bit out of your muscles. So studying at a molecular level, we'll come back to that, because that's, even after you show causation, the editors want you to do that. They want you to go and see what that lactic acids do. Even after you've done shown causation, they want you to fit a structural estimation, do a theoretical model. So in all of these cases, you see association, but you can't say it's causation, right? And the editors are going to say, if you just do maximum likelihood, they're going to say, well, yes, I see this association, but what is driving what, right? And so that makes you stuck. So what are the statistical econometric techniques, right? The fixes. And so instrumental variables, right? So what properties do you need of the instrument? That it's uncorrelated with the error and it's relevant to the exogenous variable. So the normal maximum likelihood estimator is beta equals covariance x with y over variance of x over the variance of x. So the IV estimator is z takes the place of the x. So covariance y with z over covariance x with z. The editors want you to see whether you do test, for endogeneity. So you can do what's known as a Houseman-Wu test. How different are the maximum likelihood estimates to the instrumental variable estimates, right? That's essentially what you test. And then remember the two properties of good instruments. One that is correlated with the endogenous variable. There you do an F test, just a regression. And unrelated to the error, there you just do an over-identifying J test, Hansen's J test. It's all there. I just skipped some of the mathematics for you. I can see you, that would have caused you pain, but all the mathematics is there. The other thing, rather than that statistical treatment, you could come up, as part of that statistical treatment, you could come up with really good instruments, So some people use exogenous variables that appear elsewhere in the system. Well, what's exogenous and what's endogenous? That's hard to know. And some people use lag values, That's okay, but it's not very imaginative, right? You will get marks from the editors if you come up with economically motivated and intuitive instruments. So I scoured the literature and I only come up with these 5 as being, truly good, being good instruments. And in fact, the only one I'm sure of is the one there about the sex of the firstborn child. So the sex of the firstborn child used in determining the effect of family succession. So is that a good instrument, right? So we're looking at, does family succession affect performance of a company? So family succession is the endogenous variable, right? And we want an instrument. So remember the two properties of the instrument, uncorrelated with the error. So does the sex of a baby born 40 or 50 years ago, would that be correlated with the performance of a company now? Completely random, isn't it? It's a random event. Boy or a girl born 40 or 50 years ago versus the performance now. So the sex of the firstborn child is unrelated to the error, right? But is it related to the endogenous variable? Is it related to whether there's a family succession or not? Well, unfortunately, yes, right? Especially in Asian countries, if the firstborn child is a man, then in 40, 50 years is more likely to be a family succession. So this is a great instrument, right? Because you can clearly show the instrument is uncorrelated with the error. Something that happened 40, 50 years ago, a random event, isn't correlated with performance now. And you can clearly show that it's relevant to the endogenous variable, because the child being a male means there'll be a family succession, more likely to be a family succession. So for me, that's the best one, right? And that this person, Casper Nielsen, one of the authors, has made a career of doing these really clever instruments and clever techniques for overcoming endogeneity. For example, in looking at the value of a director of a corporation, he looked at sudden deaths of directors, yeah, and what impact that had on share price once they come out. Not someone who'd been sick, right? And there'd been press reports about that, but someone literally hit by the bus on the way to work or the plane come down. So, you know, he didn't go out and kill any directors. He didn't go out and kill any directors to get his sample size up, but there was sufficient number of sudden death directors that he was actually able to put a dollar value on the value of a director, and it was substantial positive to be, yeah. And so you really couldn't think of another way to do that, right? You really couldn't think of another really good way to do that, right? So the value of a director on average, of course, some directors are more valuable than others, but on average, what's the value of a director of a corporation? So his work, Casper Nielsen, is, someone's a good academic when you always want to read what they have written, because you got to learn something. So let me try to tell you what this is all about and why the statistics and econometrics is not going to fix it, right? It's not going to fix it. That's why we're going to have to go to these natural experiments, right? So it's a big topic, right? Ownership and performance, right? Particularly if the insiders, the people that work for the company, own, they have substantial ownership. So does that get a better performance, right? And what we have here is we sort of actually know what the world looks like. But company A, the frontier between ownership and performance is maximized at 3%. For company B is maximized at 7%, and for company C at 5%, right? So that's the equilibrium. Each firm is endogenously coming up with its own equilibrium of ownership and performance. But, this might become like a big issue nationally, right? And say in the US, the Senate decides it wants to do a study to examine this relationship. And then two young, very good academics from Chicago, Vishney and Schleifer, they actually did this, go out and do maximum likelihood estimation with these, all the companies, but I'm showing it here with this. So you see the performance ownership curve is going up to 5, then it goes down, and they actually found it goes up a little bit at 25%, right? So it goes up to 5, goes down, and then kinks up a little bit at 25. And then the Senate, and this didn't happen, by the way, but the Senate then decides, based on this work by these two great people at the University of Chicago, they're going to mandate a law saying that everyone has to have 5% ownership, right? Everyone's going to. So what happens? Well, you can see what happens, right? The equilibrium is now changed, right? So A used to have an equilibrium at 3. That was where it's most was. Now, if you see where it cuts to 5, it's got a huge decrease in performance, right? B used to have at 7. Now at 5, you can see that there's a substantial reduction, and I'll show you what the reduction in performance is. So this was a bad change, right? And the problem is, if it's endogenous, you really can't be fitting this cross-sectional model, right? So that's the problem, and you can see it there. And in contrast, if we'd done our instrumental variable estimation, we would have just got a flat line. Now, that's not telling you much, but at least the Senate didn't pass a law saying everyone has to have 5%. Right, so where all this comes from is a very famous economist by the name of Demsetz. So Demsetz is a Nobel Prize winner. He's done work in a number of fields. And he is saying, well, look, if it's endogenous, then it's endogenous. You can do all the statistics you want. You're not going to undo the endogeneity, right? You've got to get that flat line that we just saw there before, right? So there needs to be more. So what Coles, Lemon, and Mischke did in the JFE, they went and studied the corporation at almost the molecular level. So they come up with a structural model, a theoretical model, principal agent model, which we know applies. You know, that's what we're talking about, ownership, performance, and managing. And what's the, you know, when's the optimal time to have more insider ownership? So they fit the principal agent model and a productivity model with its labor capital productivity, and they fit that to each company's published data. And they found high managerial productivity in things like service, IT, computers, right? So they're the companies where you should have their insider ownership, and low managerial input in metal mining and utilities. So this natural experiment, we saw the guys got the Nobel Prize for it, right? These guys do a fantastic job, Hyder and Lindquist, right? And there's been thousands of papers written on debt and taxes, right? So when they sat down to write this paper, and we'll talk about this later, but how do you decide on what fields you're going to work in? They sat down to write it. Someone might have said to them, what the hell are you doing to write a paper on debt and taxes, right? Because there's thousands of papers. But they did it right, So of all the thousands of papers on debt and taxes, this is by miles the best, right? Because they show causation, right? They show causation. They just, in fact, no one else could show an association. No one could show an association for decades, right? One of my students, John Graham, showed an association. So they looked at debt and taxes, and so these are fraught with endogeneity. So what they did was they used a natural experiment. No one had looked at state taxes. So 50 states in the US, and states have their own taxation, right? As well as federal taxation, states have their own taxation. So they had to go out. Every year every state has this little tax book. So they found all the tax increases, all the tax decreases. So, and this is over 2 decades, the 90s and 2000s. So they found over 100. Yeah. So not just 1 year of extra schooling versus not. They've got over 100 exogenous events. So, but then, you can't just do this natural experiment, because there's a treatment group, the one that's had the tax change, and there's a control group, the one that hasn't. And you look at what happens after the treatment. But you've got to satisfy, were they similar? Were the corporations in these states similar before the exogenous event, right? And we'll talk about that later, something called parallel trends. But Hyder and Lindquist talked about it here. They just showed that corporations directly across the state lines were doing just as well as the ones where the tax was changed. So the findings were that if taxes went up, then debt went up, right? And that's what theory predicts, right? Because the higher the taxes, the bigger the tax credit you get for interest. So, for example, if I own 100% of the company and there's a big high tax rate, I just have 100% debt, and I'd have one controlling. So that way, when the company pays, interest, we get a tax credit on the interest, right? And I get the money after tax and get taxed, but I still make more because if company pays a dividend, it doesn't get a tax credit. I get the dividend, right? And I still pay tax on it. So I'm better off by having 100% debt, right? Because the government gives me a check because I gave money to myself. But if I called it dividend and 100% equity, I wouldn't get a tax credit on the money I paid myself. So you can see that I've got all things on my screen.
Yes.
Don't worry. But it wasn't symmetric. The tax cuts didn't give a reduction in debt. But that to me makes sense, right? Because if the tax increases, it's easy to add debt, right? The tax decreases, it's very, it's time consuming and costly to retire debt. So the tax decreasing might be seen with a lag, right? The debt might decrease with a lag. Okay, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, they have animation, maybe one of the.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
One of the kids.
Yeah. As always, I thought it was me. I thought I did something wrong. Okay, so amazing paper, right? So of thousands of papers written on debt and taxes, and you might have thought they were foolish, starting to write another one, but it's an amazing paper, and it's a good roadmap for your own design, right? But how to put it in perspective, right? So they don't talk about this, but this is essentially what they did. This is what the editors want to see. For the natural experiment, they want to see an exogenous event, the extra year of school or the 100+ tax changes. Of course, the more exogenous events, the better. Yeah. And then there's a time dummy. Yeah. And there's a treatment dummy. Yeah. So there's a dummy for time, dummy for treatment, and then interaction. So how did performance change after the exogenous event, because the time measures the exogenous event, for the treatment firm relative to the control. So the big coefficient here in this diff and diff model is B3, because that'll tell you how the dependent variable has changed after the exogenous event for the treatment firm versus the firms versus the control firms. And then, of course, you have controls. Yeah. So, for example, the effect of tax changes on post-tax change in debt holdings. So they want you to do that, but they're not quite happy yet that you've shown causation. So you have to go back and look at a couple of things, right? That one, before the treatment, that the control firms and the treatment firms weren't exactly the same, but they were on parallel trends. So it's called parallel trends, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is if there's multiple time periods, they want you to make an adjustment for all things equal, because things might have changed from year to year. So in the Heider-Lindquist case, the editors didn't ask for it, but if they had, that was a current paper, they'd say that because it spanned 2 decades, they'd want some treatment of the time differences. So there's a couple of papers, a couple of approaches. One is to equally weight the parameters from each time period, each year. And the other way is to weight the parameters in each year by the number of treatments in each year. So if there was like 10 tax changes in a particular year, you'd weight that by 10 on the total. So equal weighting of the parameters from each year, or weighting on the basis of the number of treatments. So that's what they want to look for. And if you satisfy all those things, then they think it's causation, right? We've come a long way from that research group I showed you, right, on the board. So they want to see causation, right? Any empirical paper now and any top tier journal, they want to see causation. But we're not done yet. So now the latest is they want to see a structural estimation. So what Heider-Lindquist did is it's just simple OLS, and they've shown causation. right? And that, you know, taxes cause debt changes, right? And that's great. But now the editors want to be able to link that with theory, right? You know, why and how. They want to be able to ask what if questions. So they, you know, there are models of debt and taxes going back to Miller, Modigliani and Miller. So they want you to now go and fit a theoretical model, fit it as best you can to the data, because you've shown causation. Now you can go to the most appropriate economic model and you can answer the what if questions, right? What if the parameters changed, yeah, and so on. So thinking back to what Coles, Lemon and Meskew did, that's exactly what they did. They looked at a structural model. They had principal agent and a production function. So here we go. This is an example of a really good example of causation, showing causation with reduced, what they call as reduced form. What that different diff is called reduced form. Again, this is about a lottery. You can get 100K in a lump sum, or you can get monthly installments. So for our purposes, we're more interested in the monthly installments. So the question is, did that, yeah, oh, sorry, did either, right? Did the windfall gain cause more people to be invested in the stock market, right? So what they found was, because of the natural experiment, they were able to see you got the 150 and the treatment group and the others didn't. The people who had previously been in the stock market, it didn't affect them at all. But for the people that had not participated, that it did. Yeah, they were more likely to participate in the stock market now they got this 150,000 windfall gain. So that showed causation. You know, getting a windfall gain caused more people to be in the stock market. But then they fit a a structural model. And what they used was an economic life cycle model, right? So we sort of believe the life cycle model sort of says that you really can't make any sizable investment until you're like in your 40s, right? The famous paper by Constantinides and other, junior can't borrow. I think it appears in Econometrica, right? So junior can't borrow. It's the person in their middle age that's able to borrow. So the life cycle model they chose, right? They fit to the data, best match with the data. So then they're able to, here are the things, examine the optimal agents, actions of the agents given the model, how much of the variation is driven by each of the parameters, right? Which is good to know. And for policy experiments, what happens to Y if we change the parameters, right? So this is what they're looking for, right? So they not just showing causation, but now fitting this structure, doing the structural estimation. So it's become very demanding in empirical work. So just to, just finishing that off, what sort of structural models have been used? We know that Coles, Lemon and Meskew uses principal agent and Cobb-Douglas production function. Colleague of mine, Terry Pan, used the production function. Whitehead, who is the editor of the Journal of Financial Economics, she used an IO demand system, and we just saw that Briggs used life cycle model. Tony Whitehead, who I said is the editor of the Journal of Financial Economics, does have these lectures on YouTube that it's well worth looking at. They're long. Yeah, you'll learn more than you ever wanted to know about reduced form and structural estimation. But this is the editor, yeah, of empirical work, and she's representative of all empirical. They're looking at causation. They want the diff and diff. They want the structural estimation. So what are they looking for? So editors are looking for, if you're doing a statistical fix, they want system GMM. Yeah. They don't want you to use two-stage least squares, right? They think that's so last century. So just say you're using instrumental variables, right? They want intuitively, economically motivated instruments, but more than that, they want you to do the natural experiment, like the Nobel Prize winning economists. So that means doing a diff and dip, right? That's the reduced form estimation. Then you've got to satisfy those assumptions, right? Parallel trends, treatment of different time periods. And then they want you to do the structural estimation, right? Where you fit a theoretical model so they can ask the what if questions. So you can see for the empirical work that it has become a lot more rigorous, right? Showing causation. What is the natural experiment? Think about in terms of your own work. What is a natural experiment in your own work that you can use? If you can't find anything here in Vietnam, think about what's going on in the countries around you, right? Yeah. Think about what interventions, what has happened naturally. If you can't do it naturally, think about doing it in the laboratory, where you have control over the exogenous variables. Who needs lunch?
Yes.
So it's 12:20, I think. 12:20. What, you want to give them an hour and a half still? Yeah.
Maybe extra 10 minutes. Now, any questions? No? Okay. So everyone, please come back at around 10 to 2. And then you can have questions for them 10 minutes. And then we start at sharp.
So 1:50.
Yeah.
1.
2 o'clock if you want to. You want to give them 2 o'clock?
No, 1:50 is good.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, 2 o'clock.
Yeah. So 2 o'clock, Zoom people, we come back at 2 o'clock. Yeah. All right. And then, make sure before you leave, go to the reception, sign up for the morning, and then you will sign up again after the lunch. So 4 times a day, and Zoom people, we do the same, 4 times a day. So Zoom people, turn on your camera now. You can, unmute screenshot, and we will take the camera, all right, again at 2 o'clock. Yeah, all right. Thank you, everyone. Good luck. Give yourself a round of applause. So chương trình của mình, I speak Vietnamese so they understand clearly. Yeah. So chương trình của mình đó là ngày 2 giờ mình sẽ quay lại, nhưng mà các bạn nên quay lại trước 10 phút ha. 1 giờ 50 để bắt đầu điểm danh lần thứ 2 ở ngoài quầy Chiết Tân, và mình sẽ có 2 lần điểm danh nữa buổi chiều. Sáng nay bạn, trưa nay là sau giờ đi ra, bạn nào chưa ký thì ra ngoài Chiết Tân ký liền trước khi đi ăn trưa. Rồi mình sẽ học 2 phần nữa vào khoảng 5 giờ hôm nay, 5 giờ đến 5 rưỡi mình sẽ kết thúc, và lúc đó thì thầy sẽ, những bạn nào có đăng ký để nhận tài liệu, Đức thấy gần như hết đây, thì các bạn sẽ hy vọng là nếu như các bạn không vắng và không được gọi là naughty student thì các bạn sẽ nhận được certificate do giáo sư Tom Smith sẽ trao tận tay, và KBERI sẽ chụp ảnh, IFI-VNU chụp ảnh với bạn. Và nếu như bạn nào may mắn nữa, Tom will sign your book. Right, okay, yeah. So Tom will pick a few students. Make sure.
That was asked the question. So, it's going to be hard to do. So.
Yeah, right. So
in Saigon, a lot of people
yeah.
are asking.
Yeah. So if you don't ask questions, so you have to do something to be standout student, yeah. Otherwise, come one sign your book. Right. Give them more, maybe one important exercise, or just let them ask the question and you choose, yeah. All right. All right.
I'm sure they'll sign up.
Okay. All right. Now we finish. And Tom, I'm going to give my class. Okay. All right. Bye, everyone. See you at 1:50.
Not the same class. Come on, class.
No,
sau khi anh không được